Simmons, Chair of the committee, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. This event is being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. Now I would like to welcome all of you in Committee Room 1 at Kensington Town Hall and everyone watching on YouTube. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would ask members of the committee to please make sure that your mobiles are on silent, switched off. And we will start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Glencoe tragedy. Thank you. So we will now move on to the agenda. And the first item in 1 is apologies for absence. We don't have any. We have Councillor Usage. Thank you. So A2, declarations of interest. Does any member have an interest to declare? And A3 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of July 2025. Are we happy to approve those? Do we agree to sign them as a correct record? Yes. We have paper A4, which is an update on the Social Housing Regulation Act 2023, progress and inspection by the regulator for social housing. This report provides a review of the inspection of our housing management function undertaken by the regulator for social housing in April and May 2025. And we are very fortunate tonight to be joined by Jessica Guardolini and Angela Holden from the regulator of social housing. They're here to explain the inspection and answer any questions on the process. I want to be just very clear that the judgment itself is not up for review or scrutiny, but I would now like to invite them to introduce themselves and their role. Councillor Suffolk Bay will be presenting the report itself alongside Dan Hawthorne and Kojo Suffolk. Would you like to sit close? Near the chair. Thank you. Fabulous. Thanks, Kojo.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you very much to the regulator for coming today. So we got the report at the end of August, and we've had several meetings with residents, and on Thursday night we also had a tenants consultative committee meeting, TCC, which was very well attended. It was online because of tube strikes, and the regulator also attended that. So We've had lots of questions about the report, and now we are opening it up to the scrutiny committee to ask any questions you might have about it.
Thanks. Could I ask the regulators to introduce themselves as well? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Angela Holden. I'm the Director of Regulatory Engagement. My teams are responsible for all of our local authority engagement.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Quantalini. I'm an Assistant Director of Regulatory Engagement. Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea Council falls within my portfolio, and my team carried out the regulatory inspection of the council.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have all, I think, been briefed on the outcome of the judgment, and we have before us an update on that, the inspection and the outcome and the council's response to that. Would you like to say anything more about that?
Well, I don't quite know how. I'm sure you're obviously very informed. Let me say how informed you are. I'm not informed, but because we've been so involved in it since the inspection, I mean during the inspection, and then since the result in August, I'm not quite sure up to how far along the line you all are. I mean, the report very clearly says our grade, and it says why we got that grade. And it said we also did many good things. We passed 18 out of the 20 consumer standards, but 2 are very significant decent homes standard, which is actually something that she self-referred on when Doug was in charge. And then, so that's the part of the report. If you want to ask anything about the process of the inspection, now's your chance. And then if you want to ask us about our plan to make sure that we can then pass these other 2 standards and get the result for our residents and the result for the council that we know.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to the committee now. I'm going to start with Sam, and this way, Councillor Rossi.
Yeah, just to say, kind of you fell short on 2 areas. Was the outcome expected? Did you know, or did it kind of reveal to you something that you weren't aware of?
Well, I have to say, because we self-referred about our decency, because as you know, since Grenfell, when Doug was in charge, post Grenfell, and Doug was in charge, he made it absolute priority to focus on safety. And so we did a huge amount of work focusing on the safety of the homes. And he said, when the stock he took over when we first came on board, he said he'd never seen conditions in that state, homes in that state before. So there's been a huge amount of work, but we were aware that we still had more to do to meet the very specific decent home standards. And also the other thing that we were not good enough on is actually knowing enough about our stock. But there is a line in the report that says you were reassured that we knew our homes, but we didn't have. I don't know if you just want to explain that a little bit more. But yet we hadn't done the exact amount of knowledge required to get the decent homes. There's 2 aspects of decent homes. One is doing the decent homes. One is also knowing about where the gaps are.
Do you want to start with that?
So on safety and quality standard has a requirement that all landlords should understand all of their homes at an individual property level, and that all of those homes should meet decent home standard, which is a government standard on the quality of homes. For us, what we could see is that the council had lots of information about their homes, but the thing that we were looking for is a full assessment in terms of a stock condition survey that looks at the elements of the decent home standard. Very specific standard, has different requirements in it, and that was the bit that was missing. So the council has some of that information, but it doesn't have full coverage of its stock in that sense, and that's the bit that we wanted to see. And then the second element, as Councillor McVeigh says, is around the actual decency of the homes, so making sure that the homes meet that decent home standard as well.
Could I have just a follow-up question, if I may? Have you found this process helpful?
Yes.
Isn't it, the inspection and everything? That's been
Yes. I think, I don't know, I mean, I'm sure Dan and Koja probably want to answer this one as well, but I think in terms of just preparing for an inspection, it really makes you think about all the things you have done, which you think you have done well on, and the things that really makes you look at the gaps. And I think, and then having an outside eye coming in, and who's also very experienced living with lots of other councils, I think has been helpful. I think obviously we're disappointed with the final grade, but we've taken it as a call to action.
Yeah.
And I know that Dan's been very involved with the staff.
The other thing I'd add, of course, is that I wouldn't want to put words in Angela's or Jessica's mouth, but of course the inspection is just part of a kind of wider regulatory landscape. The consumers, the point of the consumer standards is not to pass the inspection. The point is to achieve the right outcomes for our residents. So the kind of the helpfulness of the new regime that was brought in, kind of as a directly influenced by Grenfell tragedy. We were seeing the benefit of that in terms of the organisation of our thinking, the way that we were looking at our service, long before the inspection was on the cards. It's definitely true that, of course, the inspection creates a moment when you are under particular scrutiny, when you're particularly focused on your compliance against the standards. But I think in a way, one of the things that I've come away from the process determined to do is to not kind of, as it were, in any sense, relax, particularly on the areas where the inspection found that we were compliant. There is a risk here that we focus all of our attention on stock condition and decency and take management attention off all the areas where, for now, the inspector found that we were compliant. Because the last thing we want to do is get where we need to on stock condition and decency, but fall back on those other measures. But I think the overall point is that I think the new regime, I think, is overall helpful, but I wouldn't want to fetishise the inspection as the only thing that's helpful in it, because actually it's the whole setup, I think, which we need to pay attention to, and not just seeing inspection something you got past and then kind of back to as we were.
And what I would say as well, just adding to that, is that the process of the inspection just helps focus and looking at areas where we can focus on and improve. And I think that any form of assessment, for me, is helpful, and the team found a useful process as well.
Has a kind of galvanising effect for the team, which I think is really constructive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe just a couple of questions. Maybe I'll just do one and then maybe come back to the others. Just following on from Councillor Rossi's comments, it sounds like, notwithstanding your comment, that it's disappointing, would have been expected to some extent, given you were already, as a councillor, already doing all the work to do the stock condition survey, to bring things up to the decent home standards. So I'm guessing it wasn't entirely unexpected. What are we thinking of doing differently then from the outcome of the inspection? Or is it essentially continuing with what we were doing anyway to meet those standards? Is there anything obvious that can be done to accelerate some of that? I think I can't remember the dates off the top of my head when we're looking to reach 100%, for example. How are we making sure that we can hit that? Do we have backup traffic? If we don't, for example, just thinking about what we do now after the inspection.
Yeah. So
Shall I say the first part?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
The disappointment about the grade. I'm disappointed about the grade, but as you said, there's a sense of, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about grades, but they're quite blunt. There's 4. And so you could be at the top of a grade or bottom of another grade, or so there was always a bit of hope. Whilst we self-referred, we knew we had to do that. But then Dan, in terms of our action plan, maybe you want to.
Yeah, so we went into the inspection with a plan, as it were, towards all decency and towards a comprehensive 100% stock condition cover, and we shared those plans with the inspection team as part of that process. And I mean, you won't be surprised to hear that we studied the judgment quite hard to look, as it were, for signs that there were kind of fundamental, that the team had found fundamental weaknesses in that plan. In fact, that's part of the conversation that we had with them after the inspection. And the short answer seemed to be that there aren't. So we are, I think the kind of headline answer to your question is we're not fundamentally changing tack in the approach that we're taking. And as I hope the report makes clear, we've got kind of, based on our record of delivery so far, we've got the reasonable degree of confidence that is a deliverable plan. That said, going back to what I said before, the reason for this inspection, the reason for the consumer standards, and the reason for that plan is to achieve the best possible outcome for our residents. So we will always be challenging ourselves on whether there are kind of quicker routes to achieve those outcomes that we want than that's set out in our plan. But the fundamentals of the approach, I think, are going to stay as they are, because at the moment we are getting there. It's just that we weren't able to get far enough soon enough in time to get to where we'd like to be in time for inspection.
And how are you communicating that to residents, particularly people who may well be waiting for, say, the new kitchen or the change that has been delayed for a number of years? Then individually would be looking at this and thinking, well, it's not happening fast enough.
Yeah, and so there was a TCC meeting which Councillor McVeigh and Kojo were at on Thursday. They can perhaps say a bit more about that. But the one thing I would say is that, and we communicated this in our immediate response to the judgment being published, is that at the time that we inherited or we took back in-house the management of housing from TMI after Grenfell, there were some early decisions to make about priorities for investment. And the decision that we made, which was to prioritise investment in safety measures in our homes, and kind of, which was absolutely explicitly kind of at the expense of some other measures which are critical to the decent home standard, was an active decision, and a decision that was taken in discussion and collaboration with residents. And so what we will continue to do is not just, as it were, say to residents, here's our plan, we hope you've got confidence in it. But this relates a little bit to the paper we've got coming later about the HRA business plan, is that when we are making decisions about prioritisation, those are always decisions we try and make as much as possible in consultation and engagement with our residents, so that they feel they own that journey as much as we do. Now, of course, since the consumer standards came in, particularly in the context of what we now know about our position on decency, there are some elements of that which I think from our point of view as a landlord are pretty non-negotiable, and unsurprisingly our residents don't really disagree with them to be on that part. But it is inevitably the case that some residents are having to wait longer than they or we would want. And I think it's probably fair to say that there's a reasonably good degree of understanding among residents about the journey we've been on and the challenges we've been facing.
Well, I mean, just today I was up at Stonebrook Estate, where it's taken us 5 years, but we've done a major works programme there, £12 million, replacing all the old wooden single glazed old windows, the roofs, all the things that contribute to decency. And then, of course, there's a separate programme with our kitchen and bathrooms, £23 million programme throughout the entire borough. And that's done sometimes in conjunction with the major works, but sometimes it's almost too much disruption for residents on an estate at any one time. So sometimes it goes on some of the estates where we're not doing major works separately. So it is all happening. And your question about the pace, I think Dan has answered. And I do remember Dougal was saying when I first took on this role, and I was saying, so how do you know where to do the major works first? He said, we look at the repairs, we look at the repair calls, and we focus on where we're getting most repair calls. We go and do the inspections, and we go and survey, and we prioritise according to most urgent work that is needed. And initially, the safety was also a massive part in that. So we are still working through all that.
Yeah,
but I'm confident in the team with the plan.
The final thing I'd say on residents is that, again, particularly learning the lessons from today's TMO and what's brought out in the inquiry report, is that we placed a really high feeling on maximum transparency. So we were very clear, for example, that we wrote to every resident on the day that the judgment was published to make really clear, that not only that this was the judgment, but that we absolutely accept its findings and we hold our hands up to the work that still lies ahead of us. And we think that kind of being really honest about it and not trying to kind of sugarcoat it is a really important part of building a sense of kind of trust and humility, if you like, in our approach to the work that still lies ahead.
We'll come back to some of these points.
Thank you. I just one observation, 2 brief questions, really. I was at the TCC meeting, and I've had a number of meetings with all the RA chairs in my own ward, and the common feedback has been surprise and disappointment with grade, like that we all share, but recognising obviously what we have to do in the future. But my worry is for the teams, and I'll ask this to our lead member, is it causing demotivation? Because a lot of people are saying to me that they're actually being demotivated by this rather than to focus on what we've got to do. And that's the worry, that people feel that they've come a long way. And certainly in my own ward, in the last 3 years, I was at a meeting very recently where we were talking about housing repairs, and everybody was so pleased at the progress and the good news that's in it. And this was a demotivating factor. So that was really my point. That
I think probably that more towards the start. The team, because Kojo's done a lot of work with
Yeah.
team.
So that was definitely one of the biggest factors which we were concerned about. And on the day of the announcement, I held, in conjunction with the chief executive, held a more staff session, and then I toured the borough to all of our satellite offices to have an open session with staff. And it was bitter disappointment with the staff, and there was questions that you would expect about, is it possible for us to obtain a C2 or a C1? But I think that behind the disappointment, there's definitely a ceiling to determination amongst a lot of the staff about how we can deliver on the plan which we've set up. We're developing the team, so you've got it's not so new now, but we've got an assistant director of property services who's building the team nicely, and we've got some really good motivated staff from varying backgrounds. Some are from housing associations, some have worked for other local authorities as well, and there's a commitment to actually deliver. I think naturally there are some staff who may be demotivated to the level where they may decide that they brought the organisation as far as they could, and they need to move on. But generally, in terms of the core, I think that there's a strong core there who are determined to move things in the right direction.
And just two other brief questions, and I fear I know the answer to the first one is, I know this is an every 4 years report. A lot of people are saying that can it be reviewed sooner rather than that? And if so, what is the soonest that it can be reviewed? And are we clear as a team that what we need to do if that is the case? Because that would, I think, be a very motivating factor if that there could be a swift change in this. And I think there's a belief in a lot of people, certainly on ground level, that think that we could do that.
I think from our perspective, yes, it could move. What I can't give you is a specific timescale for when that grade could change. So yes, our inspection programme, our aim is to do all our inspections of local authorities over a 4-year period. That is not to say that there won't be other engagement. I suppose picking up on Dan's point earlier, the inspection is one part of how we regulate. So our team, Jessica's team, will do our landlord improvement work, so we'll be having engagement with the council from here on. At the point that we think that they have made sufficient progress, and if we calibrate that against other cases who are maybe in that C2 space, the next grade up, if we think the council is there, we could do that on what we would call a responsive basis. So we would do sort of a desktop exercise reviewing the evidence. We'd engage with the team, we might engage with residents through that process as well. And it could move without necessarily having an inspection. So it could move. Largely the timing of that will depend on the council's progress. So rather than me giving you a specific timescale, it will depend on the council's progress, and that's something that we'll keep track on through our engagement with.
So you can't actually say it would be 1 year, 2 years?
It will depend on the council's progress.
And just a final point that was raised from the CCC meeting, and I must admit I didn't fully understand it, so maybe that could be explored here or a bit later, was the question over the number of people and how they engaged with residents. And I know there was a question over how they chose it. Was it lots of people from the north, lots of people from the south? Well, I didn't quite fully understand and cover that, so I wondered if you could maybe clarify that now.
So if I may jump in, COJO sent a brilliant email to TCC explaining how the process happened, which I think very clear, and please jump in here. But also, I don't know if it might be helpful if the regulator actually explains that aspect, because I think this is really important, that aspect of what you were checking when you met with residents. Because it wasn't a full cross-checking of the entire report, it was the engagement aspect, as my understanding.
Yeah, that's right. So one of our standards is transparency, influence and accountability. And a strong focus for us when we're looking at how council is performing against those standards is how tenants are engaged with. So how does the landlord hear the tenant voice? How can the tenant raise concerns, and how can they influence decision making? So as part of our approach in the inspection, we observed a TCC meeting, and then part of our usual methodology, as we have done for the council, and as we have done through this program since we started in April, is meeting with engaged tenants. So we directly don't have that contact with engaged tenants. We ask the council to help facilitate those meetings for us. And because we really want to hear from tenants who are part of that process, that is the process that we go through. So those were a group of tenants that we met with who were members of the TCC, but to also speak separately. So outside of that formal meeting of the officers present to understand what it feels like for them to be a tenant. Do they feel that their voices are heard? Do they feel that their concerns are acted upon? And that formed part of our inspection, and that fed into our judgment as well.
And then on kind of how we then wanted to make sure that, I mean, first of all, as Jesse said, that it's tenants, not leaseholders. So we had to make sure that the subgroup that we were selecting from TCC were all tenants. And then we did try and make sure that there was a kind of fair representation in terms of geography across the borough. So we came up with a group that was selected. Of course, one understands the questions that come up into the minds of TCC about how that process was done. But as Councillor May said, we've written to TCC now to kind of fully explain and clarify.
Given the borough is the freeholder, quite a large amount of properties, I think what I'm concerned about is there's a track record which predates Grenfell. Now we know the TMO did the management, but we were the freeholders. And so I was concerned really about kind of seems like deja vu, you know, acquisition, refurbishment, new build. Actually, the question I would say, do we feel that we have the skill sets, or should we be buying them in? Because you can't keep on repeating the same problems that we've seen from a series of projects recently. But it's not clear as to whether the lesson has been learned. Therefore, going forward, what are your plans to remedy that?
Do you mean skill sets specifically to address the issues raised in the judgment?
Sorry. First of all, we were the freeholder. So then we have stock which gets into poor condition. And then people then start doing repairs, or they do major works and then they're not quite right and they don't work and they have to be done again. And then, you know, when we've embarked on new build, that hasn't been as successful as we would have liked. So I'm just asking whether or not we have the skill sets to be able to survey, quantity survey, actually project manage some of these things, because it's ultimately costing the borough very much more if we don't do the job right. And also, if you lose confidence with your residents, you may be picking up on repairs, but actually, what the steps are you taking to actually put a clear structure in place with the skill sets that are required to deliver, so that we don't have these problems going forward?
So I'd say there's two or three parts to the answer to that. Firstly, it will always be the case, particularly in some of those very specialist professions, that whether you're talking about maintenance of existing homes or building new, that you'll be buying some of those skills and services on a kind of contract basis. And there, the skill, of course, is partly about deciding what it makes sense to have in-house, what it makes sense to bring in from outside, and then having the skills to procure and manage those contracts in a way that's good value for money and crucially ensures good quality, as you said. We do know, even for the professions where we do have in-house resources, that some of them, and surveying is one, in very competitive markets at the moment, particularly in the context of, in a kind of housing context with Alliance Law coming, that every landlord is having to gear up for that, and that is pinching the skills that we market. And so I would never sit here and kind of comfortably say, yes, we've got all the posts filled with exactly the skills we need, because in some of those professions, that is kind of constant vigilance is required to maintain not only the kind of quality of people you need in the first place, but then to make sure that their professional development is up to meeting the changing requirements of the regulatory landscape. But that in a way is the final point, which is that for all that I think we are in immeasurably better shape than we were when we took over from the TMO, which is illustrated among other things by the areas where we did meet the consumer standards, where I'm pretty confident we wouldn't have done at that moment of it coming over. The last thing that we want to do, go back to what I said before, is ever to say, yeah, it's all fine. We should always be challenging ourselves on the way that we recruit and retain talent, on the way that we develop people, and on the way that we manage performance, and learn the lessons from the poor experiences, whether those are the tricky experiences, as you described, that we've had with some of our new build projects, or the really difficult to manage contracts in some of the kind of major maintenance projects that we're doing. And when you're when you're spending tens of millions of pounds, as we now are under both of those headings, not everything's going to go perfectly. The skill is learning the lessons and not repeating the errors.
But I think if I may just jump in, the scale of the different types of homes across the borough is so different, so unique. I mean, just literally going back to Swinbrook today, every single door had to be custom made, completely and utterly differently, even though it was a 1980s estate and you would have thought every single door would be roughly the same. No, every single door had to be made completely differently. You can't just bulk buy a group of doors. So it's that has to happen hundreds, thousands of times. Hundreds of times across the borough.
I appreciate that, but I also, my takeaway from the last meeting we had was when the officer said about a project that if they knew then what they knew now, they wouldn't really have embarked on the project in the same way, which would indicate that we hadn't had the sufficient information to inform that project, and therefore touches on procurement, management, monitoring.
Yeah, I think you're right. You're right, Councillor. There's always lessons to be learned, and I think after every project we do a lessons learned, but we need to even learn from our lessons learned to, more widely, like our new homes project versus our major works project.
It
And
might
I'd love
be,
to. I'd love
sorry,
to.
Linda, it might be that's something that we as a committee would like to see something of in terms
Yes,
of
yes.
lessons learned.
I think we've already got
I
something.
would just like to see a little bit more rigour, because I've been having to look after somebody's flat that is in a RBKC property. The doors, I think the first fire doors didn't comply, and therefore even though they were under the instruction. So, I mean, it's part of its procurement, part of its monitoring, but actually tightening down. It's our budget. We're spending it,
Right.
and we're wasting it
And I think-
effectively.
I think part of the question that relates to specifically around this judgment is to what extent of those sorts of issues have they been holding us up?
Yes. Well, you were right. There was a huge issue about the fire doors way back in the early days, wasn't there?
Yeah,
And they
It's a high procurement process.
and of course, that's one of the other lessons from the Grenfell Inquiry report, which is the failure of the market to play, the private sector to play its part in ensuring building safety, because those doors were effectively
But when
installed.
Dan, you say that it's competitive market, don't you have to weigh the odds up about getting somebody who's competent as against actually the delivery of the job and the cost of the job?
Well, I wouldn't just. You need someone that's competent to do the job, full stop. But
Yeah,
as I say, I
but-
think one of the points I'm making is that, from absolutely blunt, fire doors example is a good illustration of how we are not able to always trust the private sector to the extent that we would like, and therefore you need additional skills, real rigour, as to your point, in our team, in order to be able to make sure that through procurement and the management of contracts, we aren't, as it were, there's probably less clumsy way to put this, we aren't taking things on trust, that we are making sure that we're assessing things and have got eyes on the products that are being used and the way that they're being used, so that things meet our standards. Because one of the most important jobs is to be an effective and disciplined client, and that was one of, certainly not the only, but that was one of the failings that was highlighted in the inquiry.
Chair, if I might also, actually, seeing we have got the regulator, it'd be really interesting to hear from them, because we've touched on kind of skill shortage, and with all the new requirements for qualified personnel in many different areas. Have you come across that in other councils, and how are you finding is the best way that can be addressed?
We have come across that. I'm not sure that I've got an answer on the best way for it to be addressed, if I'm honest. But RBKC is not the only council where we hear about skill shortages, challenges getting the right contractors in, challenges getting the right people in to do the works that are necessary. So it's not something that is like directly within our remit, but one of the things that we would want to see in terms of our engagement is making sure that the council can act as a good client, as Dan says, making sure that you know what you're buying, that you're holding your contractors to account if they're not delivering, that kind of thing. And I think sometimes where we see councils who are failing, they're just accepting poor quality services and thinking, well, we've contracted that out, that's not for us to deal with. So really being an intelligent client, an informed client, being able to hold your contractors to account is definitely something that we want to be able to see, particularly where services are not quite as you would want them to be at this time.
Because I think you had a problem with, if we just touch on Lancaster West briefly, where you've done 50% of the work, but some of the 50% of the work, there's some work that has got to be redone because it wasn't a standard. And that just seems to be a waste of money, takes time, and it prevents you moving on to the other 50%.
Chair, well, I'm happy to take this
Yes.
offline because
I mean,
I was at the
I
Lancaster
think
West board
that-
meeting
that
last
may-
night and that didn't come up, so.
That may come later on in a later paper, but I think staying focused on the judgment, why we've got the judgment plan for compliance.
Can I ask the two ladies from the social? I noticed you spent some time with officers, you came to the town hall. But is there, do you ever go and visit estates or a sample of the properties rather than rely on the paperwork that's provided?
It's not a routine part of our inspection process. We can do it if it was necessary and if we thought it was relevant. But it's not a routine part of our process. And we thought when we were designing the framework for how we were going to carry out these inspections, we thought really carefully about whether we would do that. And there was definitely some appetite for us to do that, not overwhelming. And I think the thing that we were really conscious of is and it's just not possible for us to cover all of the estates and all of the properties, so the risk is then you only get shown the best bits of it rather than anything else, or you get shown a sample that maybe isn't reflective across the whole. So one of the things that we're really keen on, and it's our way of working, is what we would describe as co-regulation. So we want landlords to understand their stock and landlords to understand it and be able to evidence that to us. So our focus really is around the evidence that the council can provide rather than us going and sort of double checking. So in terms of stock condition and things like that, that's what we want to see. We want to see that the council has that evidence, but we might test how valid that is. You know, has it been validated by a third party? Is there independent assurance that could be given that shows us that that information that the council has is accurate and that they're giving that to us? There are a small number of cases where we have done sort of mistake walkabout or something like that, but it would depend very much on the case and if we were dealing with a specific issue.
Because I think that in Defence got some of the oldest social housing stock in London, as it is here, as well as some of the, so they've got a wide spectrum of age and condition, really.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, Mr. Gardner.
Two questions for the regulation and one for the team, the HIM team. You tell me, what does engagement look like and how often are you going to be working with council?
So now that we've published the judgment, we move into what we call provider improvement. So as you say, this is when we engage with the council, although we have been engaging with the council for some time. And as referenced earlier, the self-referral meant that we were aware of particular issues around stock quality and decency. We will continue to engage on those areas. So the judgment was around that specific issue. The safety and quality standard around the quality and condition of homes, improving decency. That will be the focus of our provider improvement. So we will engage. We will be meeting with the council quite frequently. Usually at the beginning of this process, it's quite intensive because it's off the back of the publication. We want to make sure we establish that engagement, that relationship, our expectations as a regulator, what we expect the council to provide to us. The council have already provided their plans, so they have their improvement plan to return to decency, ensure they have 100% stock condition. So we have a solid starting point, but we want to make sure we're able to track progress against that plan. So our engagement will be, as you do, holding the council to account against that plan, ensuring that no other issues are arising as well. So even though we are focusing on the survey work, improving decency, that doesn't mean we can't ask more questions around, well, actually, the standards are incredibly broad. We want to make sure there's no issues emerging, and the council have been transparent with us through our engagement to let us know where there may be emerging issues, and we will continue to do that. So the primary focus will be improving the condition of the homes and addressing the decency, but we will be continuing to look across all 4 standards in that engagement. So intensive in the beginning, and it may be that once we see that track record continuing, that progress continuing, we may reduce the frequency, but the engagement will remain. That's also in place for our C2 providers as well. So that is a similar process, but it will be more intensive in the beginning.
Okay. And you referred to 100% there, and actually, I'm reading the report, the challenges of access on the stock condition, and also 100% in decency levels. Do you really mean 100%? And is that realistically achievable from where we are now? And is it until you reach 100% you can't actually move up another level?
So I think from our perspective, and I don't think anybody would disagree with this, obviously we think every tenant should live in a good quality, safe home. So we are going to aim and we're going to push every landlord to make sure that they are at 100% and that all of their homes are decent. We recognise that there will be challenges within that, challenges in terms of access, certain types of stock or maybe features of the stock that makes that more difficult as well. But what we want to see is that the council is working towards that. And particularly if you are coming across challenges with access and things like that, we will want to, through that landlord improvement work that Jessica's just talked about, we'll want to understand what you're doing to try and gain access, how you're working with your tenants, how you're using your tools and, how you're working through sort of housing management officers and that kind of thing to gain access and to get the information that you need and to be able to resolve those issues. It's not the case that you have to be 100% before you move up through the gradings. We would always try and be pragmatic about that. So we'll want to see some progress, as Jessica said, and we'll be monitoring particularly the track record around that of the council in delivering against their plans. What we'll want to see initially, I think, is that we'll want to see that stock condition work making really good progress, working to target, and a track record in terms of decency levels. I would expect that once we've seen some of that, and as I say, we'll calibrate that against some of our C2 cases where councils are maybe a bit further ahead in that programme. We'll want to see that is consistent, and we would talk to the council through that landlord improvement work about now's maybe the time for an upgrade, or now's the time for us to consider that at that point. But it's not the case if you look at some of the judgments that are published in C2 and in C1, it's not the case that every single property has been looked at, and it's not the case that every single property is decent. But we are always going to keep targeting that because it's so important.
And to the home team, why only 2030 for decency standards? Because when I read through your report, you're already overachieving on what you've delivered to date, and therefore 2029, 28. I look at it and I go, yes, why 2030?
I think we can be more ambitious, but probably we're being cautious. We have a new director of housing going to be starting in the new year, and the candidates we were interviewing, several of them were saying we could be more ambitious. They looked at all our information. So we'll see. We'll definitely take that challenge, though. Thank you, Councillor. And we will. Well, I mean, I think it's a good challenge, isn't it? Thank you. Sorry, as we were talking about decency, and it's 100% decency. I think under the current decency standards, when the kitchens or bathrooms are dictated by year, you'll always then you do one, and then there'll be another batch which will be out of date. So under the current standards, you're always trying to catch up for that. But do you want to say a little bit about the Decent Homes 2? It's because will we be now trying to meet Decent Homes 2, or will we be still going to the standard?
So currently Decent Homes 1 is what's in place, and that's what we will hold you to account for during this period. And that's what we'll want to see you making progress towards. Decent Homes 2 is out for consultation. So there will be a change. What we don't quite know yet, and it will be for government to make that decision about, at what point do you move to Decent Homes 2, and what is the transition period? What is the implementation period? I think, and this is not specific to RBKC, this will be for all landlords, we'll want to take into account that transition period and how you're working towards that. So there will come a time when we'll move away from Decent Homes 1 and we'll move to Decent Homes 2, but really will be dictated to by government in terms of the transition period.
But it's worth saying, partly to add to the answer to Councillor Garden's question, that timetable to 2030 is what we've kind of prudently said we think is realistic, not only to bring the homes that are not meeting the decency standards today into decency, but is also based on our projection of the homes that, as it were, will fall out of decency in the time between now and then. Because there's a slight painting the fourth bridge element to the whole proposition. But so the work that we've modelled, which takes us to 2030, accounts for that element of it as well.
Thank you. I have a couple, if I may now. I think one of the things, first of all, to note, this is my view, and I think that the committee will share this view. This judgment from the regulator is, I don't feel, any reflection on our officers and staff. If anything, it is a reflection on the extremely dire state that our homes were in as of 2017 and under the RBKC TMO. And as is detailed in the report, the lack of investment and maintenance that we had. And I think that is a quite a really important point to note. I think in some of the reports it's a little bit glossed over. Residents have mentioned we are 8 years after Grenfell, and this is not ideally where we're going to be. And so I think we need to, as you have done there, take note of how far we've come and how hard the staff have worked to get us here. And the fact that we are now at C3 is really an indication of how bad things were. And that, of course, has an impact on residents' lives and also the relationship of residents with the council, which I think, thanks to the officers and Doug Aldrin, has also come a long way. That relationship has improved a great deal in 8 years, notwithstanding we still have further to go. So that was a point I wanted to make, and it seems that the committee would share that view. I think it might be worth, if we can say a little bit about why it is C3 on only the two, I say only on 2 out of 18, 2 out of 20 outcomes. Would you be able to say a little about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up. And we had some of those conversations in the briefing we did with councillors on the day of publication as well. I think I would start by saying it's never a judgment that we take lightly, and we recognise some of the council's disappointment with that grading. It's definitely something that we thought long and hard about. I think for us, what we are trying to do, and Councillor McVeigh actually mentioned this, the gradings are quite a blunt tool in as much as there is only 4. And so within that, you will always get some variation within a grade as well. So, and we have to reflect that in what we try and do is reflect that in the narrative that we put with it. I think for us, what we're trying to do is look at each of the standards and think, what does this tell us and how serious an issue is it? And so if one of those issues is a serious failing, then that's where the grade lands. And that was where we were in this case. So we could see that the council was meeting a number of outcomes, and we were pleased to see that. But the issue around decency was very significant for us. And, you know, we talked about this at the time. So there is not full coverage. There's quite a gap in terms of coverage of that stock condition work, and a number of homes that are non-decent. And that's serious enough in and of itself to warrant that C3 grade, as far as we're concerned. It is quite an unusual grade in that sense. Normally what we see with other landlords who are C3 is they've got this issue because they've got maybe some health and safety and some tenant engagement issues, and we didn't see that, so that is quite unusual. But the seriousness of this issue in and of itself is what warranted that C3 grade.
Thank you very much.
Can I just clarify also just that the decent homes we passed all the hazards. They were not part of the decent home standard as a hazard aspect. So I just want to reassure if any residents are listening regarding the safety, because we have to be really, really mindful of the anxiety that this can cause to residents. We are the council that had Grenfell, and so that's why every time when we talk about serious failings in the terms of decent home standard, we need to really reassure residents about the safety aspect.
So, and I think so. Just for further explanation, so there are 4 elements to the decent home standard, and to be decent, the home has to meet each of those 4 elements. So that's around being free from hazards, as Councillor McVeigh says, having reasonable facilities and modernity facilities and a reasonable level of thermal comfort as well. And that is the test really, and that's why we want those stock condition surveys, because that will assess all elements of that. So that's not to say when we talk about homes being non-decent, that's not to say that they're not hazards present. And actually our team spent quite a long time trying to establish what the hazard position was and making sure that it wasn't hazards in those homes. So it is more around, as we've already talked about, kitchens, bathrooms, windows, that kind of thing. They are important, they're very important to tenant experience, but it's a different risk profile, I think, as factors. Thank you.
Thank you. Following on from that, Councillor McLean, I don't know whether you or the officers, or even our guests, could explain for our residents how can we be confident that there aren't safety issues, given that there are gaps in our stock condition survey?
My understanding is, and I'm sure that Peugeot would have come down in the regulator, is we have to get behind every front door on many occasions, primarily for annual gas safety checks, electricity checks. We have a huge raft of visiting officers. So, and the entire compliance list, the big 7 is Lestos as well. So that aspect is well documented in our homes. But getting a surveyor to specifically go and check, as Andrew said, about the standard consumer standards that specifically relates to decency, is a different suite of knowledge. And I think this is our failing here regarding our kind of communication systems, back office communication systems, not being better joined up. I think I would probably put it like that in a kind of a layman's term, that the officers are going around, but perhaps they're not all connecting up, or they're not necessarily looking for the decent homes. They may be thinking, okay, I'm here to see, because if we go, I went out with a visiting officer recently, and they are very focused on the actual resident, and they will say, you know, they've found out vulnerabilities, I found out if they've got a support network, but they won't be looking to see, gosh, your kitchen looks really old. I mean, they may write it down as well, but that would probably be somewhere else. So that's something that we're really trying to tackle.
And the consumer standard, as I understand it, expects a kind of comprehensive, integrated stock condition survey, which covers all the elements of decency in one go. So no amount of very highly trained operatives or visiting officers would be able to do the job of a stock condition survey. So even though we do have, you know, we place a high priority on that intelligence gathered from every visit to every home, that's never going to be a substitute for the full stock condition, which is why we need to kind of run both of those. And you know, we were really pleased, because you understand we place a particular priority on it, that the judgment found that we meet the expected standards on our approach to health and safety, the FLAGL, the Big Six, and fire assessments, and our work on the actions there. What the inspectors, as I understand it, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What you're looking for there is evidence and assurance that we have an effective system in place to manage that. What they're not saying when they pass this judgment is there is no issue in any home. But what they're looking for, as I understand it, is a system that is effective in picking up these issues and addressing them when they are found. So I wouldn't want any resident to be kind of to conclude from this, as it were, that we're sitting here thinking we don't have any kind of safety concerns about any home, but what we're saying is that we take some encouragement from the fact that the inspection found that we have a system which shows that we're appropriately vigilant to that and appropriately responsive when we do find issues.
Thank you. I just had a couple of issues following on from the personal feedback at the TCC meeting. First of all, I just wanted to ask, when was the council made aware of the judgment?
I can't remember the exact date, but we had a 10th of July. We had a meeting where we get. I think I'm right in saying that again, you guys might have to clarify, but I remember being told even before the inspection team was with us that as it were, the judgment is not final until the day it's published. And so what we were told in early July was the kind of provisional judgment. There was then kind of some exchange of some further information to help to kind of shore that up. But we weren't. It wasn't we were very clear. We were always very clear that it wasn't a final judgment until that day that it was published. But we had that period between But I guess early July, late August, when we were aware of the provisional judgment, talking about it on that basis.
Yeah, and did the provisional judgment change in that period? No.
No, it didn't. So the way we do it, so we notify the local authority of our decision. That's what we have did here. I'm not sure of the exact dates, although we could confirm them if you wanted. And we share with the council our feedback on the inspection, what we found and our conclusions, and then we share a draft of the regulatory judgment. Really what we're trying to do during that period of sharing the judgment is for factual accuracy. So if we've misrepresented something, if we've got a fact wrong, something like that, that's the local authority's opportunity to give us some more evidence or to correct that information. We did then have an exchange with the council, as Dan says. What we were trying to do through that is make sure that we had all of the relevant evidence, particularly because it was such a narrow judgment, to make sure that we'd taken everything into account in reaching that decision. So we did that. The judgment was C3 and we remained at a C3. And then we had comments on the factual accuracy of the judgment. So there might be some small wording changes, but nothing significant in the conclusion.
Thank you for that. And then the second thing from the TCC that came out, I think, was some concerns that residents had, for instance, around repairs, lifts, ASB, that they couldn't see how the council had been meeting those outcomes. And I wonder if we can some light onto that. I mean, I think maybe I'll just put what I think and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. I think that, as we've mentioned on the other two outcomes, the inspection or the judgment is about how the council is addressing those issues rather than the fact that everything is perfect. So in order to pass one of those outcomes, you haven't got to have no repairs and no problems with repairs ever and everything 100%, because obviously situations would always arise. But it was overall that the council is not running backlog, is responding properly and has suitable systems in place.
Yeah, I would say that is an accurate way of characterising it. What we're trying to do is look at the system to deliver the outcomes. So obviously it's not just looking at a system, because we want to see the right outcomes being delivered for tenants and that the system supports the delivery of those outcomes. That is not to say that individual cases, individual people might not have issues within their homes, or individual things might not go wrong. Of course they might. What we want to see is that there is an overall system that would support the council in delivering those outcomes for tenants and an appropriate response if something does go wrong.
Excellent, yes, because we have had some really good resident scrutiny around repairs with some really good solutions and recommendations put forward. So hopefully that can feed into that particular process.
Yeah, and even on the areas where the inspectorate found that we were meeting the consumer standards, we wouldn't say therefore that there's no room for improvement. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
We've set ourselves to be the target of being the best. And that means not just as it were meeting the standard, but exceeding it and kind of trying to lead in the sector. And so we wouldn't say that we've got nothing to learn or improve in those areas where we were found to be meeting the standard.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that as well. Obviously, the result is the result. We're disappointed with the result, but this is not the only thing we're looking at in terms of lesson learned in the curriculum. We've got our complaints process, we've got ombudsman cases. So, and there's a variety of ways in which we've got resident engagement, TCC. So there's a variety of ways we're looking at, are we doing the right things? Are we improving? Where can we improve? And building on, some of the stuff that's come out of the inspection.
Thank you. And then just finally from me, by way of scrutinising your plan to deliver 100% decency, looking at the report that we have, the numbers, and it feeds into the 2030 and being ambitious. The numbers that you seem to have for each of the different items, external doors, windows, woodworks and so forth. If I understand these figures correctly, the last 3 years, if we were to maintain that pace, then we would indeed achieve before 2030. So the question is, do we have any reason to suppose that we may not be able to keep to that pace?
I mean, capital projects and contracts, as Councillor Wade alluded to earlier, can go off kilter. We don't intend them to, but I think we're probably being a little bit more cautious than we need to. But I just feel it's better to then exceed expectations than miss them.
But it looks like hopefully we will.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Under promise, over deliver. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask if there are any councillors attending tonight who would like to ask a question.
No? Thank you.
And do we have any members of the public who would like to ask anything? No? Okay, thank you. So in that case, I think we've had a very thorough and hopefully useful discussion. I think it's important to have as much clarity around what the judgment means as possible, and to bring together the person's view of it together with the staff, and to make sure that we have a balanced view there and as much clarity as we can. So yes, I would like to thank everybody very much, and I would like to thank our guests. Thank you very much for coming, and it's been very helpful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Still
Thank you very much. Introductions. Thank you for that. And then we move to agenda item A5, which is the housing revenue account budget. So this report is provided at the request of the Housing and Communities Select Committee to provide an overview of the Council's Housing Revenue Account 26-27 budget setting and business plan. Councillor Suffolk Bay will present this report alongside Dan Hawthorne, Pedro Sapong, and Neil Isaac. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I would actually, before presenting this, almost want to just take that to committee for your views, because for the past 2 years we have presented a budget which has received quite a lot of feedback from you, and I don't think we've been presenting it in quite the right format. And I would like to be fully frank about this one, and I don't think we've got there with this one yet either, because we always try to do basically three elements in one paper. We do the annual one, which I think we covered pretty well on this one, and then we do the 5-year, and then we do the long-term HRA. This is fine. And I think we can make this a lot clearer. We can divide those into 3 different sections more. I think the narrative is really, really good in this paper. I think it explains everything. I would like to see a lot more tables and figures. And so we as a team have all been discussing this, and we're aware that this is a work in progress. But I would really appreciate your comments on where we are right now, because when we next see you, I want it to be actually quite different from what you have in front of you. And we're already been pulling out a lot more work. This here, you'll start seeing we've got the estate parking work, on the fees and charges there. And this is new as well, page 81. You'll be able to see that all laid out, which I think is much more what I believe that you're wanting to see, which I find very useful. So, and the lease on the charges. So we are getting in the right direction, I feel. But probably, I mean, I'd be intrigued to hear what you think on this one, please, if I may. Committee.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to my committee now. I'm going to go this way around. Thank you. Put you on the spot, Councillor Barnum.
Can I just talk about a couple of specifics? I got very confused. Page 53, 5.3. Talk about the discretion to set rent levels in line with the standard, which affects any increase to the ceiling CPI.
So what number are you on?
Page 53.
Yeah, and what point?
5.3. So the last paragraph in page. Is it a discretion to do it for 10 years? I don't understand where's the discretion in that, and what is.
So my understanding, I mean, colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, is that the discretion is that we have the discretion to set the rent at any level up to that cap. So it's effectively we can set the rent, but within the constraint created by that cap. And as government have confirmed, that cap will be in place for the next 10 years. So we have the discretion to set a rent each year. So we have 10 times we have the discretion to set the rent. But each time that will be capped at this CPI plus 1 level. And the reason why that's significant is that is a longer period than has usually been the case. And what it means is that landlords have a bit more confidence about projecting their income over a longer period, which makes it easier to set a long-term business plan, if that makes sense.
I mean, to be honest, several years ago, it was allowed to be done, and then because of all the, I think it changed because of COVID, I think it changed from something else. So councils around the country are kind of lurching from one uncertainty to another uncertainty as the economic and financial headwinds kind of buffeted the whole country.
And then on the next page, we talk about formula rent, and then later we talk about rent convergence. Can we have context here what our estate is? So I have no view for how many of our properties are outside rent conversions, how many in the right place, and what's the gap in monetary terms. So I would really like to see some facts and figures behind.
So we do have, and I was going to attach it as an appendix. There's actually a consultation about rent convergence, which all councils feed into, and we have fed into that as well. It does give all those figures, so we can definitely attach that as an appendix next time, because I agree it is very useful from trying to find the figures. I think it's about a third aren't converged.
There is, Neil, isn't there, a kind of headline figure for what we think rent convergence, assuming we took advantage of the full capacity offered by rent conversions, about how much that would be worth to us in terms of increasing income. Is that, you've got it off the top of your head?
It's about an extra 5 million.
Right.
That's significant.
Yeah. So that's based on exactly the analysis that you described of understanding what our current rents are and what the convergence picture would look like. I mean, very crudely, the local authorities tend to be at the lower rents, and therefore that gap, that potential additional headroom, is bigger for councils that historically had lower rents than the housing association.
But I never
So
get a feel for whether that's 50% of our.
Okay, 87%. So the council there proposes that flexibility is extended to £3 per week, in line with proposals being put forward by other London boroughs and London councils, which would enable 87% of our stock to be converged by 2035 to 36.
So that's seeking £3, whereas this would.
And then the
£2
would get 76%.
So the government consulted on whether as it would pursue convergence on the basis of £1 additional per week per year or £2 additional. And we, in line with London councils, have actually responded to say we think there's a case for saying it should be 3. But because the government was only consulting on 1 or 2, we don't think it's prudent to project at the moment that 3 will be offered, if you see what I mean. So we're not exceeding what the kind of parameters the government has set on their consultation, notwithstanding what we've said. But to be clear on what that 87% figure means, I think what that means is there would still be, even after that period of years, 13% of our homes where the rents are currently so far off target that they still wouldn't, after that period, have got to full convergence. And again, I'm looking at colleagues to check this is right. I think I'm right in saying that all new lets are let at target rate. So I don't know what the percentage is, but there will be a percentage of our homes that are already at target rent because they've been let in the recent period. It's the homes where it's effectively what this rent convergence would be allowing us to do would be to move towards target rent with an incumbent tenant in place and not wait for it to be relet.
And just to clarify this, Neil's reminded me that, of course, there was good slides and a discussion about this at TCC on Thursday, which I can.
So currently, Chair, if I may, we've got 10% converged. So we've got a long way to go to get up to the 80%, 90%.
And I also asked about convergence rates in regards to market rent versus social rent, and sure that convergence doesn't mean everything's going to be converged to market rate. Absolutely not. Social rent will still stay probably about a third market rate.
Very helpful to see that all in the chart.
We will. Thank you. Separately from this, we'll pass around the thing, but also I think probably as an annex to the actual HRA budget, we should put that in as well.
Do we know, because of course at the moment, this is all kind of ifs and buts, depending on where the government end up after the consultation. What I don't know is when we're expecting government to confirm the position and how that will align with the timing of the setting of the budget for 26-27.
Sorry if I may, Chair. I'm a bit worried because the national budget has been pushed back.
Yeah.
All the rules being read by my corporate finance colleagues are that no finance decisions will be taken until after the budget. So everything is being squeezed into late November, December. And we're coming back to you on the 8th of December, I think it is. And I'd hope we would have the answers by then. But it feels a little bit tight, and I know
Yeah, we need to manage your expectations. That
yes,
we'll have a puff of white smoke and go.
it might be difficult to get everything in for that, and if we need to come back again in the new year if things are too tight, then I think that's what we'll have to do with your indulgence. But because there are so many potential moving parts in this, it's naturally cautious on being definitive. I'm sorry.
And we haven't had a date when the consultation, the convergence consultation is going to announce on that.
No, because I think
They're
it's
just waiting,
everything's
waiting,
being
waiting.
handled on the because it will impact on the benefit bill for government. So it all hangs together. I mean, I'm not going to be down and it'll be out tomorrow, I know, but
And maybe it will, you know.
Yeah.
In the event that it's not,
Yeah.
perhaps you can release as to what we do best around that December meeting.
Yeah.
Um,
As we've tried to do throughout this, we want to do this in a way and at a time that is most helpful to you and kind of in turn most helpful to us because you've had a chance to look at the real stuff, the real questions. So we're very happy to kind of to maintain a bit of flexibility on that.
Two quick questions. Page 56, 517, which is the other income. I just felt that, as I said, deja vu, I've read this paragraph, but all that's happened is the dates changed from last year. I remember Doug sitting there going, we may not get them agreed by last April, only before last 2024, said it would come into place in April 25. And here we are kicking the can down to April 26th. Am I missing something? It's just doesn't seem to be my
Parking services.
These are all the, yes, the other that you were bringing to the PCC.
Yeah.
The paragraph's identical to last year, I think, I believe. And I'm kind of saying why.
The
why
change
hasn't
has
it
been we have added in the parking charges into this pack. But point taken, Dan, we need to take that.
Yeah,
away.
that last sentence, the
timeline is now
moved again to
shifted.
April 2026, and that's where last year you said this was going to move to April 25, and this now seems to be moving to April 26. And can you go why? Why
Well,
can't we agree with you?
We will definitely challenge that, but I just assume it's because they didn't have the right information in place. But now you can see on Appendix 3, page 79, these are the new charges which are going to be proposed, which will impact this current budget.
Yeah.
So
So
I
it should at
think
least
that
give a bit
is,
of confidence that it's not going to slip
Yes,
again.
it's
It's
not
a fair
going to slip
question
again.
on how it slipped by a year.
but
Well, it was 18 months essentially, because it should have been made in the year.
Do we know why it hasn't been agreed?
I don't think you do actually.
Do we know how we can make sure that it will be agreed?
But I think
these are now part of the budget. These
yes,
are
so
what we're working
these will
on.
now be part of the budget proposal. So I think kind of we can give you an assurance that it will be part of what we recommend for agreement when the final budget is set in February.
Does
But
that
it's a
mean,
totally fair question about why that didn't happen on the timetable that we originally had.
And just my last question is very, very, very easy. You put in a date in page 71, 18.2 about the workshop style event, the residents' summit. Are you really looking at Sunday the 16th? No, I'm not.
It's the resident summit is Saturday the 15th.
Saturday.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm looking at page 59, 6.7. The proposed budget will be set at 351 million. I was just wondering at what point Wells End and Warwick Road Estate is going to come in on any scheduling, given some of the problems highlighted on Warwick Road.
So what I have asked to do as part of the budget you will see either in December or January is a breakdown of all the major works, and which will list by estate what the works are doing on. I mean, I get the sheet, well, they're almost refusing to print it out to me anymore because it's so big about all the major work projects that are currently on site, that are currently at contract, at tender. So that will be part of the pack. And so you will see the specific estates broken down, and you'll see where financing for those will fall by year. Because I mean, this is huge, and this is just too general.
When will we see that?
Oh, we'll definitely be with the next paper. So whether it will be in December or whether it will be in January, depending on the meeting, but that is going to be part.
I'd just like to highlight that this actually was brought to our attention when Joanna was a councillor for Abingdon, and that's a number of years ago. So it's the condition of the property. So the next one is page 60, 7.4. This, the council has agreed the option to dispose of vacant non-estate properties, i.e. street properties, I presume. And I have a question. So you sell this property, so you've got nowhere to decant people to, and I can't see where you're going to be able to acquire the replacement housing.
So you sell it, so you only sell the property when it's empty. So there isn't a need to rehouse anyone because you're only selling them when they're void. And then the basic principle is that the acquisitions will overwhelmingly be ex right to buys on our estates. Which are kind of they meet the twin requirements of generally being lower value. So crucially that creates then a difference between the sale receipt and then what you're spending on the new home, and then you're able to recycle the difference back into the HRA capital programme. But then crucially, those homes on estates in ex right to buys are much more straightforward from a management point of view. That's how the model works.
I'm still slightly confused how you're going to replace the places, the accommodation, given the need.
This was brought to you a year ago.
Does it mean that everybody's going into estates, or you're just stepping back from street properties?
This entire policy and strategy was discussed at your committee a year ago when we put it into place. This policy into place. It's gone through TCC. It's gone through, and you are correct that it will only happen when the street properties, for example, are void.
I think. Sorry, Linda. I think the question on this is: do we have any update on how many street properties have been sold?
Thank you.
I think just to clarify, it's a void that's being sold because it's expensive to maintain.
No. I just want to clarify.
And a number is being re-provided by buying back properties on estates.
All right, and it's just psychologically that I think that, for example, I think the council are not going to renew 3 leases of street properties in, I think there are 2 in Earls Court and 1 elsewhere. These people have been used to living in street properties, and therefore are they going to by default be told?
I think you're talking about something different. You're talking about the freehold ones. So this is completely separate from this policy. So this policy here, we are the landlord, we own the freehold, and a tenant is in there. So if the tenant is in there, we do not sell it. It is their home until they maybe move or pass on. So that's number one. So you are conflating the other issue, which is where we are not the freehold, and that's about 3 blocks in the borough. One of them is in Chelsea, I believe the other 2 are in Earls Court, and we are consulting on that at the moment, and that is more or less out of our hands because we don't have the money to buy it from the freeholder, for example, which is a large.
So my next question is there any possibility of actually retaining some of the street properties to be able to transfer those people to those properties.
We will look at every option available.
Because, and the,
And in regards to the chair's question about the numbers, yes, we will definitely get that back to you. I'm afraid there has not been much progress. But there has been issues in the team, and Dan is on that, and hopefully we will be able to report something positive. With the
sorry,
next
so my last question is about on page 61. It says 8.8. And when it said basically that there was about 70 million of backlog of identified. When we did have a meeting, I think it was indicated to bring all of our stock up to standard. It was going to probably be considerably higher than 350 million, which must have been at 2018 value. And has there been any kind of change?
Yeah, it says it's
I think
8.9. The next, yeah, it says in the,
million, isn't it?
yeah, it is. It says in the next paragraph 8.9 about that 620 over 6 years, but it's actually more 700 but over a slightly longer year period. But we can, if it's more helpful to the committee, we can put this in a chart if that helps. I mean, sometimes I find when you're putting all the numbers just in a narrative like this, it can not be as clear as it could be.
I think that we do, because there are a lot of numbers being banded around here, and it's very hard to see how they stack up. But they, and I think there would it'd be useful to have some clarity there. What do you think?
So 8. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you.
Really, it's a question I don't think you'll be able to answer. It's about the known unknown, and you've already touched upon it with the Fairer Funding Bill and other things. Could be a perfect storm on the horizon for all of our budgets, let alone the housing budgets. My worry is, and this I'm getting back from residents in my own ward, and I have one of the oldest properties. It was in the first half of Queen Victoria's reign, it was built, and they are saying to me that they are really worried about the cost of living and how it's going to affect them with their rents in the future. So if the funding bill goes worst case scenarios, it may not at the moment. Have we got a backup plan? Have we got a plan? Because I'm really worried about residents struggling, and some of them struggling without probably the safety net that we currently provide to them.
So yeah, thank you. I think well, we still will be maintaining our tenancy support fund, and we have a very good income team that really help residents who need it. Just today I was on some various emails about one resident who's got a grant to help with tenancy sustainability. And again, as you know, last winter we had to step in when the government took away the winter fuel payment for people who just missed out on pension credit, and we, off the top of my head, I think we paid £54,000. So we did a grant of £200 to those elderly people who most needed it. I think the government has rowed back on that now. But you're right. But I think you know we do look after our tenants who really need it the most. But you're right, it is going to be a very challenge.
Yeah, it's also worth saying probably that the outcome of the Fairer Funding Review will have a much greater impact on general funding than the HI, because but there's two buts there. Firstly, we know there's a lot of the people who live who are our tenants and leaseholders, particularly our tenants, are reliant on other services from the council which are funded from the general fund, whether that's through social care or other things. And so there's no doubt that that in a kind of worst case scenario, some things may begin to bite in a way that we then as a landlord will have to be able to respond to. And also, I guess the other thing to say is that in all this conversation about rent conversions and what it means for our income and so on, we have to recognise that what we're doing is putting up rents that our tenants are paying. And for some people that's paid through the benefit bill, some people that will be a manageable impact, but there will be impacts there which we have to be, it shouldn't be a decision blindly made to be putting up rents given the impact that it has on our tenants. So as Councillor McVeigh says, even if that is the decision we end up taking on balance because we think it's the best way to maintain the homes that we're responsible for, we have to be really mindful of the impacts that has on our residents and the measures we put in place to mitigate those for the worst effect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I also wanted to talk about the non-estate properties. I just want a final clarification. I think most of it's covered. Is the policy now then that as soon as a non-estate unit reaches void, you will attempt to sell it?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay, so going on to the HRA capital programme budget. So there's the £351 million that has been allocated for 5 years. So in effect, then, I was going back to the previous topic and the target to reach the decent home standard. In effect, that would take us up to 2030. So essentially, that is what you believe we spend to meet that standard. So I guess 2 questions there. How much of that is essentially reliant on, I suppose, some of the unknowns? How much of that is reliant on things like grant funding? How much of that, in fact, is reliant on selling non-estate properties and getting revenue? What percentage of that, I suppose, is unknown as opposed to what's already budgeted or in the ground as we go over the borrowing against? And then the flip side, are we confident if we did have the money, for the sake of argument, that that's actually sufficient to meet that decent home standard? Has that been budgeted with that in mind, bearing in mind, of course, that we haven't done full stock survey and we don't know what all the issues are necessarily? Has that been taken into account?
I'll give it a go if I may, Chair. Yes, you're absolutely right, Councillor. The stock condition survey is still underway, so the numbers in here are based on the very best estimates we have at the moment. The stock survey data so far has been broadly consistent with the numbers we were expecting. So it's a bit of an unknown, but the surveys so far are not massively different from what we had in the old asset database. So a degree of confidence more than completely unknown. The table on page 59 sets out the sources of finance. So the 13 million receipts, the main bulk of that is sales of property, and we do get additional funding from lease extensions on right to buys, where people who bought their properties 40 years ago need to extend their leases. So we do get a receipt from that. Right to buys, very few, although there was a surge in applications last year, but we haven't yet seen those go through to completion, but there's a chance they might, so it might get a little bit more. So in terms of raising the borrowing, in the chart at the numbers at the back, you'll see the debt charges going up and up and up and up. So that's the cost of the borrowing. If the rent settlement was not to be as at £2 a week like we modelled, but was to be at £1 a week, that would impact on how much we could borrow. So we'd have to come back with a rephased programme. Conversely, if the rent increase was £3 a week, that would give us a little bit more headroom to cope with the issues that you highlighted.
So based on that, then, if you return to a decent home standard, I mean, listening to that, there was a bit of a question mark as to whether it's realistic. We were talking about being ambitious earlier, but then is even 2030 realistic?
I think it's realistic based on some prudent assumptions, but we have to accept that some of those assumptions we just can't, because of the environment we operate in, we just can't be absolutely certain about. Any long-term business plan has to be based on some assumptions. We're confident. So you have to be confident in 2 things: A, that the financial assumptions are prudent, and B, that we have the delivery capacity. Councillor Simmons referred earlier to the fact that our track record so far shows that our delivery capacity is operating at the pace we think we need to. So then, to your question, we can't point to as it were, the cash we've got in the bank now to show that we can do this. We have to make assumptions. We think those assumptions are prudent and kind of defensible, and for what it's worth, they're kind of in line with the assumptions that others in the sector make too. But it's the reason that we update this plan. Even though it's a long-term plan, we have to update it every year, because every year we have more information about the medium and long-term picture. So you're right to say that we don't have certainty, but if we waited until we had certainty, we'd never be able to make a plan. And we have to make a plan, not least because of what regulators found. Let alone, of course, the most important thing, which is the outcomes for our residents. So I think that's we have to accept a little bit about that being the reality of the environment we operate.
What about potential changes to inflation and interest rates? Obviously, inflation, especially when it comes to construction, has been particularly hard here. Has that been modelled again in a reasonable way?
That's a
Again,
good question. I think on page 81, we need to make that clearer on the chart. I've put the question mark, interest charges at what percent? So, yes. I mean, yeah, that's what the modelling for it.
Is there a table, Neil, in the report which sets out what those assumptions are about those kind of rates?
Yeah, on the 19, page 71 and 72. Very good, yeah. We've got the key assumptions of each. Assumption of interest rates.
Probably click on specific documents.
Yeah, and
Unless it's
not be
Yeah.
broken.
But to be honest, there's no cheating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So first, can I thank you for bringing this to us so early, because I know it has been a source of, it's stressful, you say. And so I think we really appreciate that. And then I'm going to ask you some specific questions. The New Homes Programme, does that sit within the capital section?
So the way that works, I mean, different councils do it in different ways. What we do is that the New Homes Programme is a general fund capital programme, so that comes in the general fund capital budget. And then once the homes are finished, we appropriate the social rent component of those schemes into the HRA as built homes. But the financing of the construction is done in the general fund. Other people do it in different ways. That's the way we do it.
But actually, to that point, should we be showing something about that in our HRA budget?
Well, it's in there, isn't it? About the kind of, for example, the assumed rental income as the new schemes come on track, and then the kind of the values at which we assume the appropriations will be made.
Yeah.
I mean, it's relatively modest because our programme is pretty modest compared to some other councils. But yeah, those assumptions that's baked into the model.
Fine. And then when you try to have convergence, which I understand is desirable for us, and 76% of us that want to be converged by 35, 36, do you get resistance from people? I mean, I can understand it from our point of view. We want them all to come together. If you're one of the people.
It hasn't happened yet. So as Dan was saying, that when we have new properties and it's not a new property, but a new tenancy, then it's not the equivalent of the rent conversions. But if you're an existing, so that hasn't happened yet. So this is why there's this consultation that's going out across all London boroughs. Well, where London boroughs, I assume it's nationwide. But you're right, Councillor Rossi. I mean, to Councillor North's point earlier about cost of living, the government might not do it because it will impact the housing benefit then as well. So
I think it's fair to say this is still a conversation that's happening, as it were, at policy level.
Yes.
I think the real answer to your question won't become apparent until the government has set the levels, and then residents start, as it were, seeing those increases in their prospective rent.
I think I've got another one. On page 53, which is the HRA basis of return on it. The government below inflation 7% cap on social rents. I didn't think we were at 7% inflation, so.
No, so that refers. Where's that?
That
It's on 4.3. Sorry.
4.3.
The year in question. So we were at 11%.
Yes,
In
we were.
September 23, which would have been the rate setting date for 23-24.
Okay, so this is decided then when it was 7%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's the one. Thank you.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of points. One of the things that's bothering me is on page 61, 8.9. It's not a new thing, I know, but here we have a funding gap of around £400 million and an estimated borrowing amount of £200 million, which leaves £200 million unaccounted for. Yes. So my question is, what are we going to do?
It's not £200 million per year, that's all I can say. It's great.
Over 6 years.
That was at the time.
Mm.
And if you remember last year's graph had us going off a cliff pretty much immediately.
Yeah.
Because of the assumptions we made on implementing rent convergence, the graph at the back is stable for the first 9 or 10 years. And it's that extra income from rent convergence, which means we can afford the borrowing that goes into the table on this page now, the capital program thing. So,
what that means, another way of saying that, which is kind of interesting, I think about it, is that at best, rent convergence puts us back to where we were before the kind of runaway inflation hit. What it doesn't really do is significantly increase our spending power compared to, as it were, the month before the Russians invaded Ukraine. It's welcome, because otherwise we'd be in a dire and unsustainable position. But it's just put us back where we were rather than creating any additional headroom.
I think the Russians did invade Ukraine, but I think we also need to remember that there are other factors that have influenced that, including things like COVID and Brexit.
But also, one of the issues here is the cost of borrowing for the councils everywhere. I mean, we do have the Public Rights Loan Board, which is a preferential rate. I mean, the real ask to government would be to actually allow HRA revenue accounts to actually borrow at an even lower rate of interest, particularly regarding all the new regulations and how can councils across the UK keep up with all the new regulations if there's no funding. So I know at council-wide levels, the officers have been talking about this. I've been raising it with my counterparts, but all social landlords, not just councils, but all social landlords want to do their best for their tenants and to do all the works, to meet regulations and to provide tenants with safe and healthy homes. And all that comes at a cost as well.
Thank you. And then I just want to make sure vis-a-vis our tenant support fund. Support fund, yes, the TSF. I'm not sure where that is in the paper. And I think in terms of what it used to be and then what it was and then what it is now, I think the paper says 300.3 and then 0.5. And then 534 on page 58. Lovely, thank you. 534 on page 58. So yes, it's 0.3 in 23-24, and then 0.5 for the following two. Do we feel collectively that over there on that table that we are pitching to the right amount based on how it's been operating in the past 3 years?
Yes, I mean, I was speaking to one of the team about that just today, actually, and I think they're a very proactive team as well as reactive with tenants coming to them, and they do know where they need to work with tenants. So I think I'm pretty confident that we are on the right levels, and we can look at the exact take-ups.
Yes,
from previous years.
I would really like that. I would really like to see the take-ups on the previous years so far since it's been implemented. And then just finally, in terms of the format of this paper, I'm thinking I would like to look at some previous papers from before my time as chair and see where we have in previous years things we can take away and bring into the format here, as well as the feedback that we've been having from the committee tonight. So perhaps that's something that I can take a look at with Bella, and perhaps come back after consulting with the committee, so with some more clearer guidance.
And also, if I may suggest, Chair, what I found quite helpful, I was looking at the huge stack on my desk of the general fund budget and looking at specific departments like the Environment Department and seeing how they do all their fees and charges. Clearly that's laid out, how the rent for every single capital property is there. So, you haven't even got our breakdown of our major works. So, there's a lot even from that.
And I suppose it's about getting the balance right between
overloading too much,
drowning us with paper and actually getting the information that we need to answer the questions that we need to ask.
Because it would clarify the amounts of money that seem to be scattered around the report.
Absolutely. And also in terms of us as a committee, I think looking at the assumptions is really important. Looking at the proposals is really important.
The risk.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm now going to turn to any councillors in attendance this evening who would like to ask a question.
Lovely, thank you.
In that case, I'm going to turn to any members of the public who would like to ask a question. So, in that case, I think we've got some actions coming out of that, and it's a very helpful discussion. And I think it is just an iterative process, and it may be a never-ending iterative process, but hopefully we improve by increments. So we now turn to agenda item 6, which is Housing Asset Management Strategy 2025 to 2030, maintaining and investing in residence homes. This report and its appendices are provided at the request of the Housing and Communities Select Committee to allow the committee to consider and scrutinise the Council's proposed housing asset management strategy titled Maintaining and Investing in Residence Homes. Councillor Softland Bay is to present this report alongside Dan Hawthorne and Cody Salpong. And I believe we also have it taken Fiona Leonard Walker. So I am going to start. Would you like to present the report?
Thank you very much. I think you've probably had quite enough of me tonight, so I'll hand over to Fiona, or we can go straight into questions. I think it's quite self-explanatory, and I hope you will appreciate our nice, graphic, simple way of explaining this. And I always struggle with the word kind of housing asset management.
Yeah.
And so that's where we've changed it to, which I think is very clever with Fiona and others. Maintaining and investing in residence homes. That's basically what it is. It's homes.
Yes.
I always think asset management just sounds very kind of financial. It's not really that. So thank you, Fiona, for that.
Yeah, and there's a few things that we've done. We don't use the words unit, dwelling, property. It's not. It's residence homes. We look after the housing, portfolio of housing. It's residence homes, and that's a real shift. And I think it is a move to make something very clear. We've been very conscious to put it into residents' speak. It's been co-designed with our residents, so we've had lots of sessions with them. We've presented to TCC, and we're out to consultation at the moment, so that closes on the 6th of October. It actually builds on the work that we've been doing with the regulator and will continue to do with the regulator. People in the team will know I have a very simple mantra, so I think some of the comments earlier, just to reassure people, yes, we're disappointed to get C3, but we're absolutely galvanised and we'll get C2 as fast as possible. But we're aiming for C1. And so people will know my mantra is we know the condition of our homes, we know the standards we need to meet, therefore we know what we need to do and we have a plan. And you'll find most of the people in my team will repeat that back to you, not quite word for word, but we're getting there because that's what we're all committed to do. I'm going to start just to be fair.
Right,
This
okay. I can say I really love these kind of papers because they're so aspirational. And obviously you can agree with everything that's in them. But in a way, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So just specifically on one, I'm going to just pick one issue to build down on, which is page 21. Well, in the last paragraph, it's how do you involve the residents? And in this instance, it's, you know, particularly in evaluating and selecting contractors during mini competitions. So I would like to know how that works, how you involve the residents, or whether they kind of take part or interested in taking part, and what do you mean by mini competitions, and does this all kind of elongate the time? I mean, you want to include people and they have some choice of who's going to be doing what in their home. But yeah, could you just explain exactly how that works?
Yeah. So Project Union is a framework that we've got for contracts. So that means we've already gone through a competition to establish a range of contractors who have already met most of the criteria we want. On our larger projects, we will then go out for a mini competition because it's a streamlined version of the competition because they're already on a framework. So that accelerates how quickly we can go through it, and it also helps with Section 20 consultation. In terms of how we involve residents, we ask residents to be part of the panel to do some of that assessment. We would like more residents to get involved. We probably have a similar pool of residents who are very interested to get involved in it. But we would like more to be involved in it because I think it is really important that that voice is there. And then we're reviewing at the moment and refocusing our team around resident liaison through the projects, because we've got a real emphasis on co-design, partnership, and building on some of the learning from the work being done by Lancaster West to take some of that and do more of that in terms of what we're doing across the borough.
And just a bit about the social, because it mentions about the social value as law contractors doing social value. And we're trying to make that very much more estate driven where the work is. And we're talking about that, weren't we, about even came up TCC actually about getting residents involved about what they'd actually like the social value aspect to be.
Now, can I ask, it was one of my questions, what is social value? Because
The social value is a percentage of the contract that that contractors give over and above the exact contract to help improve things. So, for example, on the Swinbrook Estate, they've organised fun days. They can sometimes do extra training and apprenticeships for local people to train. Other examples, we might be doing a community room on the estate. So outside the main contract, if you're contracted to do roofs and windows,
what are you giving back to the state during your construction work? Yeah, could I suggest you actually put that in the agreement? Because it appears several times and I'm going, what's that?
So just to define what is social value.
I think it needs to be what is social value, but also how, I mean, at the moment, I think there hasn't always been a lot of transparency around how social value is allocated. And I think that's been worked on.
It is, yes.
Because sometimes that's the case. Somebody might have major works on their estate, and the social value for that might go to somewhere quite else. And I think we need to make sure that's not happening.
Yes, so we're reviewing all of that at the moment. So we've got a new head of capital delivery is in post, and her background is in resident engagement. And then we have a new programme manager, co-design partnership with the capital delivery team, who starts in November. And that's a real shift that we're doing to engage our residents, and within that team is the social value aspect to make sure it is much tighter and residents have a strong view in terms of how that money is spent and where it's spent.
Is that embedded here?
It should be. I want to double check.
Yeah, I think we need to strengthen that as much as possible, I think. Thank you.
Sorry, to piggyback on your question.
Sorry,
Sorry, I was piggyback your question, so piggybacked it on it. So sorry.
did you have another question?
No, it's fine.
Thanks, Can I ask about new homes? This is those 600 new homes, started new homes delivery program. The document talks about obviously Kensal and Earls Court. It's obviously intended to be very high level broadly in this document. I don't get too much into that, but is there more detail going to be forthcoming about how some of these new developments will bring affordable housing forward?
Well, so this is about council owned housing and how we manage and maintain that. At the moment, we don't know that any of the homes on Earls Court or Kensal House will come into council ownership. We do know there will be social affordable housing on those sites, but it's yet to be determined. Yeah, we're interested in principle.
Well, I guess that's my question. Is there thinking around that?
So there absolutely is, and you know, it comes down to a number of questions. Firstly, bluntly, it has to be available to us at a price that makes sense and doesn't kind of do kind of have a net negative impact on the HRA business plan that we were just talking about. We also, of course, have some pretty high standards about quality and safety of new homes, and we need to be satisfied about the way they're being built before we acquire them. If and when we got to a point where we were making an acquisition, and that those kind of criteria and that kind of process for reaching that judgment wouldn't be covered in the asset management strategy. But the moment those homes did come into our ownership, they would become subject to the strategy as the new homes that we're building ourselves.
I mean, the fact that they're mentioned, of course, in here leads me to assume that there is
Which page
ambition. Well, section 12, new homes. It says the strategy supports housing growth in key locations. And clearly, as we are talking about the housing asset management, the implication is that the council is either open to it or already discussions to grow our own.
We should probably clarify the funding document and what we mean when we're saying that, because I agree it's
not to mention private landlords.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for picking that.
Something I'm learning a lot about and I'm very excited about, 7.4 sustainability and energy performance. Page 20 at the bottom is also page 108 in the latter text. And I recognise that we've got some members of the public here that are particularly interested in this, and I know they're very keen to speak to officers. So I wonder if you can, I mean, there are leaps and bounds with this, and progress is being made, and solar panels that were around 10 years ago are different solar panels that are being installed now. So is this something that we can incorporate and even possibly save even more money in the future on that, because it's just something we're all learning about more. And I know there's a lot of private developments in and around the borough at the moment that are looking at this as a particular project. So is there anything else you can share on that? Or not?
I mean, it's something that we all have to get to, and it's something I think, as you say, with our old stock, we do struggle with in terms of thermal efficiency, and it's one of the things we have to get to because of decent homes. So yes, any form of new technology we want to look at, any form of retrofitting that can be done efficiently, definitely. We're open to looking at anything. So
I'm just conscious that we're 70% of this borough is a conservation area, and I know that it's something that, you know, solar panels don't always fit well with that, but I've just been blown away by seeing some of the new technologies that you wouldn't know they were a solar panel.
Like
energy absorbing panel. Yes, exactly. And sometimes on wall coverings, south-facing wall coverings and a lot of the private blocks are looking at this, and obviously with the planning regulations as well. So I noticed you've got it in here as a section. So
I think it's fair to say we're ambitious. We'd love to be doing more of it. I think the priority has to be safety and decency first, and then keeping an eye on all the developments that are coming and making sure we can embed that. So obviously we're looking at a lot with the district heating and the heat billing network and all, and doing all of that side first. Keeping an eye on all the technology and piloting where we can and understanding it. And absolutely, we'd love to live more of it. But I think
there is obviously kind of in the Venn diagram there is an overlap, because as the regulator team said when they were here, an element of decency is that kind of thermal comfort performance of the home, and the consultation on decent homes too had a particular focus on ramping up those energy efficiency expectations. So over the long term, a lot of this will move from being in the kind of sort of a glib way of putting it, but from the kind of nice to have territory to the absolutely expected territory. Yeah. And we'll want to try and stay ahead of that as much as possible, but we can expect, as it were, the kind of baseline expectation from a regulatory point of view to be constantly pushing towards.
But if I can say, Councillor, if you have any suggestions or any companies doing this you'd like us to meet, sit down with, please, we're always open to ideas. Again, I was at a roundtable meeting on Monday with social housing providers, and someone was talking about a new bit of technology that might actually remove mold spores from the air. In regards to your damp and mold, which is incredible. So again, so there's anything to do with thermal efficiency, I think, please, I'm sure Fiona or Kojo would definitely be on for meeting with anyone.
I mean, if we just go back 5-10 years, LED was what we all wanted to do, but it was really expensive. Yeah. And now you wouldn't really think of buying anything other than LED because it's really cheap. So I think that technology is developing, and the more it develops, the more we can embed it. And we are trying some stuff. So one of the things we're looking at is potential pilot for the infrared wallpaper, which again helps a very low level way of heating rooms with little cost, but particularly areas where we need to sort of tackle cold walls if they're external walls.
Thank you.
It's a very nice presentation, very pretty. Where's the money? And it's nice to see some figures and also when you're talking about contractors, do they have to go through a process? And if they fail to do a job, what is the mechanism to be able to recover the costs?
So I think the first thing in terms of where's the money, that's in the business plan. So we're very clear that the strategy is what we need to do and all the aspirational stuff and actually the way that we're going to deliver it. And the business plan is linked and developed at the same time. So the same members of the team have been working with finance to develop the business plan.
Yes, so it's not a coincidence that we brought these items here together on the same night.
It's just something that I think that you should be thinking about if you're setting out a vision.
So the figures
not just for your residents, but also for your contractors to buy into. And if there's a realization that if they do poor workmanship or there's something that the council will have a mechanism to seek recover.
Absolutely.
Because that's one of the historic problems that we've experienced, isn't it?
Well, it goes back to what I was saying before about the importance of kind of good discipline on contract management. But to be really clear, the figures in the business plan that you just looked at are based on a costed assessment of what it will take to deliver this asset management strategy. And this asset management strategy is an articulation of the standards that this business plan is designed to meet. So two fit together and are based on the same analysis of what we're going to do and how much it's going to cost.
Yeah, and then the targets we put in the plan, you'll see to the later pages 33 to 35, they've got targets in there, and those targets, the completion in financial years, are tied into the business plan modelling.
So this document here is really a set of principles that's going to be guiding investment. Thank you. I recognise this from residents, but that also includes leaseholders, and I think it's very light on its leaseholders. So if you go to page 10, for investment exposure, there's no mention of leaseholders on that page. And I think that's wrong. And then when you do actually prop up with leaseholders, which is on page 13, it's much more of a sort of obligatory consultation paragraph. It's not worded in the gentle way that you phrased it for consultants. It's actually, we're going to do our section 20 and that's kind of it. And you kind of go, actually, you owe the leaseholders as much as a duty. So suggest A, there's more reference in there, and B, maybe we look at 13, on page 13, to soften it a little.
You already asked about my social values. Can I ask what is mandatory occurrence reporting? Which is on page 23. And where I'm going to use terms like this, really to explain what they are.
Okay, yes, we can. So building safety case reports, we probably should explain that as well. And mandatory occurrence reporting, they are specific terms, and I think it could be helpful. We did define those. If I may go back to leaseholders, one of the things we've consciously done is we refer to residents throughout. So we only differentiate between tenant and leaseholder when we have to, which is why there isn't so much a distinction throughout the document. We do believe in consulting with all our residents regardless of tenure. But I do take on board then when we go to 4.2, it does feel a little bit more just going to section 20 that I think we need to soften that.
So perhaps it would be useful saying up front that where you refer to residents, you're referring to
tenants and
leaseholders. Yes.
Yes.
Because I think that would be useful.
Yes.
Suddenly you go to this only reference to leasehold and you go, oh, let's start.
That's a good point. And would a glossary at the end be helpful as well? We can cover some of these terms.
Sometimes it's useful alongside the phrase if it's not a big, only because when you're reading it, you don't have to flip.
Okay.
And just one purely impactful, on page 10, you ask, right at the bottom, if you are interested in taking part in engagement activities, please contact. Could you separate that off as a paragraph and make it big and bold so that it stands out on that page? Because I think that would be really good. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I first of all have a suggestion or question following on from the discussion around social value. To what extent do we think that social value might be able to be used to assist the HRA in delivering services?
So just to make sure I understand you bring up what you're asking, as it were, there are elements of the service that we currently provide that are funded from kind of core HRA, where we could instead fund that from social value contributions as well.
Have we considered that? Is there?
We have. I mean, if we look at the Procurement Act, I think that defines social value, and there's some terms around it, but we're probably better to take that away and look at it and come back.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure it has to be over and above.
It's
additional to delivery of the contract. So it has to be something. But things like doing the residence rooms, social rooms, and things like that, I think we could do. Potentially, you might be able to look at some of the adding to the estate improvement budget in terms of doing some landscape areas or to do some play areas. They're the sort of things that we would do.
Had security gates put in on one down in Chelsea. Had communal gardens put in again in Chelsea one. So it's very varied. We can get a list of it. So you can see the range.
Yeah,
and then,
I mean, I would like to know more about what it can and can't be used for.
Yeah.
So that we.
Sorry, the one thing I would say is that of course the social value contribution is a one-off thing. So what it can't do is replace an ongoing annual cost in the revenue budget, but it could offset kind of one-off expenditure of a more kind of capital intervention nature. But as Fiona said, I think I'd be slightly nervous about getting to a place where we were relying on social value interventions to do things that were part of the absolutely core requirements of the landlord. See what I mean?
Yes,
I think
it's better. They're doing things. They're donating equipment into schools. They're working with schools, trying to push much more that they do apprenticeships to actually bring residents into the work that they do, or into the more residents coming in and working our teams. So I think that's where it's focused on in terms of funding apprenticeships or work experience, and some of the training as well.
And do our sort of ongoing repairs contracts, do they attract social value component?
So we're just going through using the Project Union framework to go out again and to set up a framework of repairs contractors. And within that, we'll be doing social value as well. As it is, we do work with our principal suppliers and the repairs team to make sure they offer some social value back. So one of them, SureServe, actually provided us with a drone that we can then go out and do surveys on roofs and gutters and things, which is quite
That's
helpful.
an excellent example. That's the kind of thing that
Yeah,
is going to save money.
there's
within
save
the
money and
HRA.
surveys. We're not having to scaffold a few
Exactly,
things.
exactly. Fantastic, thank you. I think most of my questions have been answered. The only thing I wanted to just really highlight and touch upon is the consultation and the next step. So it's been to CCC as an initial draft.
It came to TCC as initial draft. We have members of TCC coming to co-design sessions with us. We did a number of those. We've got a drop-in session next week when members of the team are just going to be based in a room over here, and we said to residents, just come in whenever suits you, and you can feed back to us or we can explain things to you. We pushed the consultation out in lots of comms to do that, so it's open until the 6th of October. We really want as many residents as possible.
So perhaps we can all help in our own wards to try and spread the word on that. I think it'd be very interesting and useful. I'm looking at page 87, and it's 5.4.3, little one 3, where we are looking for feedback from the consultation, how it's going to be analysed and evaluated. I'd be really interested to see how that then feeds into any revised draft that then arises. Again, that's a way of demonstrating the impact of residents' input, really.
So the covering report, when we take this leadership team to approval, the covering report will have a section which does exactly that, which summarises the feedback from the consultation and changes we've made. So
and we did a report through the co-design sessions as well, where we captured all the comments and we provided all the feedback for any queries raised, and then we embedded it in the document.
Great, fantastic.
So we've got that as well.
And we, Steve, that would be fantastic. So I think this paper is asking us, do we think there's been sufficient resident involvement? And I think it's not just about quantity, it's about impact on quality. So in that case, my answer would be yes. But I don't think I have any further questions on that. So I'm going to move to our councillors in the room.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question, thank you. I know this has been through extensive resident engagement, so I sort of hesitate to sort of say this, but do you think this is laser focused enough as a management plan? And I say that because, for example, in the priority 2, warm, dry and well maintained, we have kitchen and bathroom replacement. Well, actually, that's not essential for keeping the place warm, dry and well maintained. I mean, there might be a few things in kitchens that need repairing, but they're not absolutely essential. And then when you look at greener, safer and welcoming, there are quite a few things there that are nice to have. And given the financial pressure that the HRA is on and our constant need to actually keep the fabric of our stock well maintained and manage that, that's our principal asset management obligation, I would say. Would you accept that perhaps there are a few too many nice to have things here?
I've asked about well maintained. That's a core aspect of decent homes compliance. So we're quite conscious that we use.
That's not a priority. It doesn't say decent homes here as a priority, as part of the priority.
No, but well maintained is part of decent homes. So we're trying to very consciously use resident speak in terms of making sure that residents understand our commitment to keeping well maintained homes, and that well maintained homes aspect is one part of the decent homes.
So on page 11, we could make that clearer.
The kitchen and bathroom requirement is part of decent
It's
homes.
part of
Therefore,
decent
it's
homes.
necessary in order to meet that
Absolutely.
standard.
One of the priorities is to meet the decent home standard. Rather, it's really what I'm sort of saying. It's a bit I would say it's a bit muddling, but.
We can state it clearly.
I'll leave that.
I can state it clearly in there. It's not a problem. We can add that in there because it does. Adding it to the introduction is good because then it defines it underneath and more residents speak. So it's not a problem about it.
It's just that there's no.
Yeah, I think that was my only question.
Thank you. But I think we're all in no doubt that kitchens and bathrooms is a component of decent home standard, albeit not one
And
that
important
impacts
to
the
residents, I
safety.
don't deny that, that was just a question.
And it's also important to compliance.
Yes,
And if we didn't have it, we might not be compliant, which we want to be.
yes. I mean,
For the
they're
reasons
not,
that are in the code.
they're not classified as key components. Your windows and roofs are more important and they take longer to sort than kitchens and bathrooms. Yes, we need to do kitchens and bathrooms as well.
Thank you. Councillor Hurd.
Thank you, Chair. It is a lovely presentation. Fiona, going back to residents' engagement, that's an recurring, problem with the residents, and most of them feel that they've never been consulted enough, and I agree it's a tall order because we try very hard and quite often they don't want to engage. How have you found, has the engagement improved? Do you have any data of if it's on the increase or is static? Because I've been to presentations where, we've had staff members from the council with the directorate or whatever, 5 members of staff, and in the audience, literally 4 members or, handful of members, which obviously is not a very conducive process. So how have you found that?
So I would say similar. Sometimes we have more officers in attendance than sometimes residents. But I'd say the residents we have been very engaged. And we've done a number of different sessions at different times, online and in person, to try and encourage as many people as possible. And the comms team are probably quite bored of me, keep asking, how else can we engage? How else can we push the consultation? And it is a tall order, but I think we will keep going. And those that we've had involved have been hugely beneficial and very engaged and really helpful in terms of doing it. And, in terms of we set them the goal to say, we don't want to call it an asset management strategy because it's your homes and how we maintain them for you. And they came up with the wording. So, it's that we could share with them what we wanted to do, but we let them really come up with the words that reflected what they wanted to achieve.
Right.
So I'd love to have more involved.
Mm-hmm. But it would be quite good to have some data of every time you engage, what has been the return on it and the positive or, impact on.
And we've got that because we've got the minutes from every session and the actions that came out of it and then the feedback from those actions.
Right.
So
the other thing I would also like to raise is going on from Councillor Gardner's point, the leaseholders in our ward often feel that they are more dictated to and not, listened to by us. And because they just feel, okay, we are lessees and we're told of our costs. This is just and my other point I would make, I quickly just browsed while I was here, so there's no mention of monitoring. I think one of the things that we, in my experience, we fall back on is we provide lots of services, we spend money, but there's no monitoring of a project. So repair comes in and then the resident will say, oh yes, I call the contractor to fix it, but nothing's happened. So is there any mention of monitoring here? Who monitors when the repair starts?
So let Fiona answer the monitoring part, just in terms of the leaseholders, that doesn't actually sit within Fiona's service area, that sits with another assistant director's service area. I would take that feedback away. We are trying to look at the way in which we engage with leaseholders and try and get them involved more and more. And when we had TCC last week, even though the inspection is around social tenants, there were quite a lot of, there were some leaseholders who made quite a lot of comments, which were taken on board. But I can take that away and we can look at how we engage leaseholders.
I think we've got a homeowners panel next week. We had one actually cancelled because of the tube strike.
That's
I think.
right.
As well as something else next week. So we do have homeowner panels.
And when we do capital delivery works and when we do come and meet us events, all of those are open to all residents. So regardless of tenure, so we do talk to leaseholders, and we do want leaseholders to be really involved. I guess we're constantly at the call out for people to come and work on procurement with us, and that's an ideal opportunity for leaseholders to become a part of the scrutiny of the procurement and then be more assured then perhaps of the costs and the rigour that we put into selecting our contractors. And as part of that, we set out the framework for how we'll monitor them and then what contractual measures are in place to take action if they don't deliver. So it'd be great, you know. And do I want to call out for more residents to get involved as well?
Do we have penalty clauses in when the contractor doesn't
Oh,
turn up?
yes.
Yes.
For instance, right, okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes. That's, and but have you ever exercised any of
Yes.
those?
Yes. 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 And
Yes.
yes.
Probably more often than we'd like, because we don't want to be doing that.
Mhm.
But yes, we do.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before I move on, can I just make the point vis-a-vis the TCC? Membership of the TCC is officers of resident associations. Now, it may be that you have an officer of a resident association, which happens to be a leaseholder, but which nevertheless has a mandate to represent tenants.
Yeah.
And some people are able to have empathy, compassion, and imagination to be able to represent things for people that are in a situation different than their own. If I had voted for an RA chair that was a leaseholder and I wasn't, I would expect them to be representing my interests.
I think
And I think we can say at the TCC that is maybe what happened. But I just think we need to be really clear about that we are not undermining the representations that are being made by people with a mandate, regardless of their.
Sorry, councillor, I wasn't, you know,
I know that point was made earlier in relation to the regulator.
Yes, no, it was just a point in terms of what I was trying to say is that the inspection was around social housing tenants and the contribution from the leaseholders was important. But, you know, I've had some engagement with some leaseholders afterwards, after the email that I sent around how they were selected. And I suppose the point I was trying to make that maybe it was clumsy, is that all of the opinions of all of our residents, irrespective of their tenant, is important. And I'll just try to use that as an example to demonstrate how important it was.
Thank you. And before I go, just one more thing. Can we please have the dates of the homeowners panel?
They're all up on the website. They're all in my diary.
And that's a request then that we get sent a link.
Yes.
So we can all be aware of it.
Definitely.
Thank
I
you.
think until tonight, that's the first mention I've heard of the homeowners.
I've only
Seriously.
found
Gosh,
out
okay.
about 2 meetings.
It's next
That's
week,
not good
Tuesday.
enough. Apologies about that.
But we have, I think, as a committee, been asking for quite a while. May we have a list of all the housing meetings that there are, so that we can see what actually there is instead of dates. Yeah.
And see how little evening I have to listen.
Likewise. Are there any members of the public who would like to ask a question on this paper or comment for the committee? But thank you. Okay. So in that case, again, I think we've had another very interesting discussion. We have had some suggestions for you to take away with that. I don't think we have any strong recommendations, but hopefully our input has been helpful. Really helpful. And so saying, we will then move on to paper A7. It's not a long one.
Yes.
But we are getting there.
Getting there is half the fun.
Yes. And I'm going to be reading out your name again.
Short questions we're going to have.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I think I'm about to go into your working programme. I was thinking, gosh, poor you, you've got to stay into your working programme. Yes.
This report provides the response to the Housing and Community Select Committee's recommendations on the Lancaster West refurbishment. And this was mentioned as an item which had been called into the committee. Councillor Soft McVeigh will be presenting this report alongside Dan Hawthorne and Pojo Sarpong.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Chair. Yes, and I have discussed this report primarily actually with James Spell, because he was there. I'm not sure either Dan or Pojo was actually at the meeting, because Doug, myself, and James were there. Casting my mind back to, I think it was in May, wasn't it? Yes, there we go, May. And I think all your recommendations have been very helpful. As you can see, we have accepted or partially accepted them all. So thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to turn to Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. Again, I won't be long. I wanted to focus on the response to recommendation 3. I felt we read it quite much. And I haven't seen anything particularly change since our main meeting. And I think there was a view that sort of work was not to the right standard and wasn't being assessed or checked. And I think relying on a December 2023 report was a bit longer to finance.
I think one of the aspects of the work, fair point, I will take this back to James about this. I think one of the aspects of the work from memory that came up in the meeting was to do with the heat network pipes in particular, and whether they were in the right place, whether they were not. So we did get, actually Councillor Claviciotis had asked for a review of the heat network programme by an independent organisation, so I can find out what's happened to that. And we have now blocked in those pipes. But in terms of the overall work, I mean, I was at NatWest board last night. I mean, it's still ongoing. I'm not quite sure, other than an outside quantity or quality surveyor, how you see this happening.
But you know how one of the things it's been talked about often is that you only spot check a small percentage of the works that are done. Is actually maybe you need to spot check more of the works that are done to actually really see whether the 75% that aren't checked are actually up to scratch. I mean, maybe you need to open a bit further and actually see whether you
to see whether the clerk of works is actually doing more than okay. So Dan, so Joe, we can push that back. I mean, it also actually, in fact, Fiona probably have had something to say about this as well, because you know she covers major works, and that external assurance is normally provided by an outside body, which would be a clerk of works type organisation or a quality or quantity surveyor, you know, none of which would be in-house operatives.
I mean, it's like catch-22 that actually the quality surveyor, your quantity surveyor who's going around and checking, actually setting him on in the long run because he's spotting the fact that actually 75% of works are substandard and they're getting away with them at the moment. So it's catch-22.
Yeah, and I think to be absolutely blunt about it, I think the reason why this one was only partially accepted is the sense that kind of this has got to be a proportionate effort. I mean, we've got finite resources, and we want to predominantly spend those resources on doing the work rather than going to the nth degree. So you're always making a judgment about what the proportionately appropriate approach is, and certainly you heard in that meeting an account of some residents' experiences. You know, our view, as you know, is that probably wasn't a fully representative view across the whole piece, and so the position we've set out here is what, in the professional judgment of the team, is a proportionate approach to checking the quality of the work. And we spend a lot of time thinking about what the right way is to strike this balance, if you see what I mean. And what's set out here is the approach that we take. And of course, we're open to, but I'd be nervous about saying, you know, yes, we'll go away and do more and more and more and more on this, because we've got a balance to strike here.
No, I mean, I'm conscious, most of us were in those repairs conferences as well, where the stats weren't as good as, so there was a disconnect. And it is actually whether you can do some spot checks on this to actually say, do you know what, there isn't a disconnect, actually those figures are accurate, in which case, fine, we recognise that it was therefore a small minority that had a particular problem in that group, as opposed to actually we're now looking under the carpet and there are more issues than we had thought, and we've been, but it's how can you do something that's an effective check without massive expenditure. I understand that balance, but actually doing some sharp checks may actually help you hold the contractor to account more.
And I think it's important to note as well, it wasn't just about the heat network pipes.
Oh no, understood.
It was broader than that. And I think who came to that meeting will have been people that had concerns. People who don't have concerns obviously haven't picked up on the issues that the residents who do have concerns did pick up on. So I don't think we should necessarily say we think that wasn't representative, because representativeness is not necessarily what you need when you're looking at matters of quality. You want the people who have spotted issues of concern, and that's what we had. So I think Joanna's suggestion of more spot checks is a very good one, and I hope it will be taken on board. I'd also just quickly like to add where it says the programme board, who it consists of: resident representative, ward councillors, MHCRG. Now, ward councillors are not quantity surveyors or quality surveyors, as Councillor McVeigh suggested would be needed. So in terms of the oversight on the programme board, this is mostly lay people. So
No, sorry, but most of our contracts do have a quantity surveyor or a quality surveyor.
yes,
So
I'm just
we are
about
not doing
trying
that. No,
no, we're not doing that.
we are saying.
So in terms of assurance of the quality of the works, there's a limit to how far the programme board can deliver that.
Well, this is why we ask those experts to come and report to programme board, so we can add another action to the programme board to actually have a report from those parties.
Thank you.
My comments, the same as Joanne's.
No questions.
On the last one, in view of, I mean, it's about recommendation 5. In view of the strength feeling at that meeting, has the amount between 400 per year, qualifying blocks, etc., has that been accepted
Yes.
by people? It has.
And it's done by block basis when the work is happening, and it's not retrospective, and
Okay.
and it is absolutely the first that's ever happened on any estate, any work, any major works in the borough.
Apart from Hazelwood and Dodena.
No, that's completely done as a contract.
Mhm.
Yeah, but that is not separate. So as we talked about, as Councillor Hood was asking about, I've just gone about not completing a contract, that is separate, and that's contract negotiation. This has nothing to do with the contractor. This is completely and utterly to do with the council acknowledging the disruption caused to residents by this huge amount of varied and multiple works going on, rather than a contract not filling what it should have done.
I think that is an extremely important distinction, which needs to be made clear across the board. Thank you for that. In terms of whether residents have accepted it, is that your question?
Yes.
Residents don't feel that it's adequate.
I've had mixed responses.
I haven't. Thank you.
But the other point to remember is come down to the HRA. So if you speak to other residents.
If you look at the recommendation itself, it is asking to estimate the cost of different options, just something I asked Councillor Taylor Smith to do in 2022, I think. Seeking funding beyond the HRA, including negotiations with NHCRG and ministers for a fair central government contribution due to their role in the disaster, the government's public commitments made to residents of the estate, and their involvement in the refurbishment programme laws since 2019. So,
Chair, I agree with you on all of those points.
Yeah,
I completely agree with you, and I have been pushing even just to try to get it out of the different parts of the council, and definitely pushing to get it out of government. At the moment, we have not been successful on either of those two fronts. So at the moment, it's coming out of the HRA, but I completely agree.
Thank you. I just want to say a general point on this one. Just the way the paper is written, I think if I probably could read this whole paper without necessarily knowing or realising that this was the estate where Grenfell happened. And one of the things that I think one of the reasons why this came to the committee, and one of the reasons why we've made the recommendations that we've made, including around compensation and well-being, is because this is not just a question of the council and the disruption and the delays, but it's
all of that in the context of the order. And I think it's really important that we do acknowledge that as explicitly as possible.
I accept that, and I accept that probably this response to your committee meeting should probably also have your paper with it.
Well, I was thinking that would have included it, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so exactly. I suppose I'm just making the pack even bigger, but
Yeah.
it would pull it much more together.
Or there could have been a link.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Thank you. Yes.
So on recommendation 1, which is partially accepted, which is to urgently reassess the project in light of resident feedback. We have some statistics there and some numbers. I feel that paragraph 4, 3 and 4 a little bit, maybe either sort of missing the point or have the wrong focus, because it's not just reassess it in light of funding, it's reassess it in light of our understanding of the issues that residents are raising. And that's what I thought that the officers, I think, member had taken away from that meeting on the night. But it seems that those concerns don't seem to have been figuring in the undertaking or the reassessment.
I mean, this is tricky because I think that we absolutely understand what the recommendation was describing in terms of, let me not assume that. Let me play back what I think it was saying, which is that what you picked up from the comments that were made in the meeting was that there were some residents who were effectively wanting the work to weren't sure they supported the work anymore because the trade-off between the disruption cost and potential benefit. And so what we've tried to do in the response is illustrate the evidence, the reason that we have to believe that the majority view of residents on the estate is to continue. And so, this is something we talked about extensively with the lead member, particularly in light of your report, because obviously the last thing we want to do is press on something as large scale and disruptive as this if we don't feel we have resident consent for it. So we spend a lot of time engaging that view, and the statistics here are aimed at showing, as it were, the work that we've done to test that view and the results that we've seen, and that bluntly, I think kind of what we're saying is that we're confident that overall the kind of higher volume of feedback that we got that was available in that meeting shows that overall, of course not universal, but overall the significant majority of residents are in favour of us pressing on. So I think what we're saying is we feel that mandate holds, and for that reason, the kind of fundamental reconsideration about whether this work should continue is not one that we're taking forward. We're not kind of seriously considering a hold. But what we've got to accept, I think, in the context of that decision is that there are some residents who are very significantly dissatisfied with the impact it's having, and then we've got to take really seriously all the measures that we can take to address those concerns. But I don't want you to think that we've misunderstood what you're saying. We absolutely understood what you were saying. It's just that the evidence that we've got, we think, doesn't quite line up with that.
So, thank you. So I am not convinced that perhaps we haven't made this clear enough, because I don't know about the rest of the committee. I don't think we were saying here, is it to continue or to not continue with the project? It was to reassess and identify options for how the concerns can be addressed. So in that case, I would expect this to be accepted in full, given that we're not recommending that you stop the project. And we heard very, very clearly, particularly from the representative from Lancaster West RA, that those commitments and policies made by the council and the government must be honoured. So there's no way here that we're saying we think you should stop it, but simply to reassess, look at what we have heard from the residents, even if it was one resident whose life was being made hell. We, I hope, would want to be looking at ways to mitigate that, whatever those ways might be. Now, some people said, oh, we just only want our windows and our kitchen, and then we don't need the rest of the bells and whistles. There were people there who said they wished they could move away.
These are all mitigating factors that would improve people's lives. And I would hope that we would be looking into a programme to look at how, what can be offered, as you've just said, Dan, to address the concerns and suffering of residents who are going through it.
So
not on an overall
Can I
basis.
jump in here?
Yeah, please do.
So last night at the Lancaster West board meeting, there is a new document which will cover part of it, which is the respite offer. Very, very comprehensive, make it very, very clear.
Enhanced respite. Yes.
Enhanced respite, which make it very, very clear for that aspect. And then the other part which I've made very clear is on which lot it was, I think it's what. Anyway, it's Calvert and Walk, that we are looking very, very clearly at two different options. One where we are, you know this, Chair, one where we're looking at the window aspects and then future proofing it so as and when either the money comes through or residents feel they can cope with more work.
Yeah.
We can do the external padding as well. So we are really mindful. I mean, it says in here the line about funding, which of course underpins absolutely everything. But also, even if we did get all the funding, which hopefully we're hoping to have, the residents might say, okay, we just pause for a few years. We don't want it. So that will all be taken into account. So I think we're in broad agreement, and we're quibbling whether we should have put partially in or not partially in. But I hope that the understanding, I believe the understanding is there that we're all talking about the very similar.
I think from what Dan said at the end of his answer to me just then, does give me a bit of confidence that that is the case. But as long as we're all really, really clear about that, because I'm not completely clear from the paper as a whole that we have an adequate acknowledgement and understanding of the impacts in the context of it being the Grenfell estate.
Yeah.
And I think it's just really important that we make that really, really clear.
I think
it's
the
not
team
just-
do have that understanding, so if that hasn't come through in the paper, then we should.
So I think that's.
Can I just say, when I read your response to the recommendation, I had no feeling for whether any of this was new data or new facts. It was very, I couldn't gauge whether it was during your initial consultations in 23 or before. It just didn't really have much. This has happened since May and this is what's changed. And so I really find it very hard to gauge.
Some of it I wondered, why were we not told that, or where is it not in the report already? But yeah, I think thank you very much for this response, and certainly I'm sure the ward councillors will be continuing to monitor how this work progresses, and perhaps we may have an update on the committee at some point.
On the Lancaster West specifically.
Because there's no point in us making recommendations.
Don't have the
And then we don't see the impact.
I mean, I know you personally, because you come to the board meeting, you're aware it's going on, but to the meeting in general.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much. Yes,
Can I ask, has anybody from housing come to the working group next week?
no.
Okay. So maybe one of you might want to just stay briefly for the next paper.
Okay.
If you don't have a train to catch.
Well, I'd like to catch, but I can stay.
Are there any councillors in the room who had a question or comment on this paper? No. In that case, thank you all.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, committee. It's now open session. Thank you.
Marathon, I know normally communities is here as well.
I know.
It's been a housing roadshow today.
So we're on paper 8. We're making progress slowly. And this is the report setting out the development of the Select Committee's work programme, identifying priorities for the municipal year 2025 to 2026. We're recommended to agree the next steps of the consultation working group in Appendix 1. So I'm going to, I was going to say, I'm going to hand over to Councillor Gardner to say a few words about the consultation working group, because we're going to hopefully agree at these next steps.
So this is a very different way of doing working group, and we are intending to do it as a very intense period over a day or two. And so essentially it is consultation and engagement. And what we would like is a member of your team to join us next Tuesday to talk about whether there is an element of the housing brief that we should look at, or indeed whether we as members of the working group, when we sit and talk about what we would like to focus on in a session, is whether actually housing consultations happen to be one of them, and your resident engagement. So if you could attend, Bella will send out in, or one of your team, Bella will send out the invitation. The focus is essentially paragraph 4 of paper 1, the very last page of the pack. So it's 1 or 2 days evidence session where literally you have 45 minutes, then you have potentially a 15-minute break. Members of the public can appear, residents and councillors can pop in, and you really focus on different areas. And so it's been done. Bella's actually done it in her old job, and it's been done, I think, in Devon and around the country. But I think this is the first time we as a council have probably done it. So it is a taste it and see as we go. But if members of the committee have any suggestions of anything they would like for us to look at, please do come forward.
Yes, something that came up recently in my ward, and it wasn't a housing thing at all, but at what point do you have to have a consultation rather than a notification? So this change is happening, and we send you a letter and we tell you what is the threshold for an actual proper consultation, because some residents said consulted and whatever, but without going into details, it was, you know, I think not such a big thing, but yeah, if you could just consider that.
A particular area or department?
This was highways.
Highway.
No, environmental services, sorry.
Am I right in thinking that the scope of this work is council-wide? So kind of, so the principal officer supports you for this bit of work comes from the communities department, I'm assuming.
Right.
So the invitation that you've extended to us to potentially have a housing participation, is that an invitation which you also want to extend to all the other parts of the council that do engagement work?
We have extended it
Okay.
To various people. So when I was just asking Ella, one of your team was there. I know housing has a disproportionate number of consultations, and it's a question of actually whether we can package them up better in terms of volume, or indeed whether you're already looking at that.
Well, we certainly have them bit of that. But
So certainly it is. Sorry, it's very hard. It is very broad, and actually that's one reason why we have a working group to actually rule out things or put things in, or actually discover that no, we want to look at it by a topic as opposed to an area of a department. So it's at the moment anything's on the table, but plenty will fall off.
And if you can send us details of the kind of format and approach, that's we can give some thought to probably conclude someone and who that person would be.
So thank you. If you've got any further thoughts, please do email and myself.
I haven't anything for yet, but thank you. Just to thank you, Councillor Gardner. As committee, are we agreed in this next steps in Appendix 1 for the working group? Yes. We're agreed. Thank you very much. Now, I see you say you have a name.
Because we didn't have an opportunity because of the presentation at the beginning, I've had some community select committee action tracker. We have 14 cases in total, 8 in progress, and 2 require responses. I would just like to.
So thank you. So we would expect once something has been completed, it will then be taken off the track. So we would expect everything that's on here to be in progress or pending.
But
and the question is, where the first one, for instance,
19th
Yeah.
of September to 2023.
So I think this is a piece of work for me and possibly Joanna, to work with Bella to look at what needs to be chased up on that and put forward, but thank you for raising it. And so that concludes this meeting of the committee. Thank you to everyone for your time and attendance this evening.
Harry, just to clarify, unless we're sent out, this is the trial, we're putting everything here, but there wasn't a consultation, then everyone's closed, well. It's highly, but what I'm, if the was the thing, what